Agostina Jalabert was born on March 23, 1991, in Carmen de Patagones, Buenos Aires, Argentina. She belonged to a well-known family and was the eldest of three daughters of Colina and Edgardo Jalabert, who served as the Secretary of Health in their city. Her uncle, German Jalabert, a former provincial minister of tourism, and was a pre-candidate for deputy in the Rio Negro region. Consequently, the Jalabert family was widely recognized in their province and other regions of Argentina. Those who knew Agostina since her childhood consistently praised her outstanding qualities. She was described as a sensitive, sincere, and loving child who had a passion for dogs. She excelled in design, crafts, and decoration. She had a keen sense of taste and excelled in many things. Agostina also had a strong interest in fashion. She even designed the graduation sweaters for her high school class. She loved dressing up, and during her teenage years, her friends often gathered in the garage of her house for pre-dance parties. She would try to introduce her different groups of friends to each other, always striving to connect people. Those close to her described her as sociable and an excellent hostess. Agostina enjoyed baking and cooking, and she was skilled at it. With a curious nature, when something piqued her interest, she pursued it. After completing her secondary education, she initially enrolled in architecture but later abandoned it. During that time, she focused her energy on fashion design and studied it for a while, but she ultimately changed her direction. Nevertheless, she was a successful young woman who used her knowledge to chase her dreams. She even started her own clothing brand, worked as a model, and was building her career. At some point in her adult life, Agostina's path crossed with Juan Reverter, with whom she began a relationship that seemed to be going well. Little is known about Juan's life, and even the names of his parents have not been disclosed. The only accessible information about Juan is his LinkedIn profile, which promotes him as a software engineer and a graduate of the National Technological University in Argentina. Interestingly, a search at the university did not reveal him as a graduate. Instead, a resolution from the university's Superior Council in 2017 stated that he had not passed two subjects during the periods of 2008 and 2009, which led to him losing his status as a regular student in the field of information systems engineering. Agostina and Juan's relationship began during the global issue and was characterized by ups and downs. According to some of her family members, he exhibited psychological violence towards her and was controlling. However, the situation escalated in the summer of 2021, marked by more serious conflicts and violence perpetrated by Juan against Agostina. Her father shared that she was deeply affected by the relationship, but with the support of her family, she was able to rebuild her life and had no contact with him for a whole year. In September 2022, Agostina made the decision to move to Mexico, specifically to the beautiful beach town of Playa del Carmen in the Riviera Maya, to advance her modeling career. She rented an apartment and left her comfort zone in Argentina, creating some distance from Juan. In Mexico, Agostina worked as a hostess and engaged in modeling opportunities. Her dream was to travel the world while pursuing her modeling aspirations. She loved Playa del Carmen and felt genuinely happy there, quickly finding work and thriving. She built many friendships and had the support of a childhood friend who lived nearby, so she didn't feel alone. Additionally, she brought her dog, Bruna, along for emotional support. Agostina loved traveling, which was clear from her social media posts. She had visited amazing places like Brazil, New Zealand, China, and several European capitals such as Madrid, Paris, London, and Brussels, sharing her experiences with her 16,000 Instagram followers. She planned to move to Europe in the future. Meanwhile, her 21-year-old sister Candela came to spend the summer in Playa del Carmen to enjoy the beautiful beaches and be near Agostina. They chose to share Agostina's two-bedroom apartment to stay comfortable. At the end of December, Agostina's ex-boyfriend Juan returned to her life for the holidays. They reconciled, and he began living with both Agostina and her sister, Candela. Candela was never comfortable with the idea of sharing their home with her sister's boyfriend, But things moved quickly, and soon he was staying in Agostina's room. In recent talks with her family, Agostina revealed that they had decided to get back together and that they planned to move to Spain. However, their relationship never seemed to maintain peace for long. On Thursday, February 16th, a serious argument broke out after Agostina discovered that her partner had been unfaithful. The tension in the apartment was high. The following day, February 17th, 2023, Candela left her sister alone with Juan. When Candela returned the next morning at 7 a.m., she found the door to her sister's apartment locked. She asked the building's doorman if there was a way to get inside. They informed her that they had heard screams and a fight coming from the apartment during the night, prompting the police to be called twice due to complaints from neighbors. Candela returned to the apartment and tried to enter using the access code, but it didn't work. The door was locked from the inside, so she knocked. After several attempts, Juan Reverter eventually answered the door and claimed that Agostina was sleeping. While Agostina and Candela were arguing, Agostina's small dog started barking. The dog, Bruna, led her to the bathroom, and there they found Agostina hanging from the towel rack, sitting or half-sitting, 3 feet off the floor with many bruises. They quickly untied her and brought her to the living room to administer CPR, but it was too late. Agostina was already dead. Candela then called the police. Forensic experts arrived to investigate the scene and took the body to the morgue, where an autopsy was conducted. The case was originally ruled to end one's own life and marked as closed. However, the Jalabert family believed that Agostina's death was actually a murder by her boyfriend, and they had valid reasons for this suspicion. In late February, Edgardo sent a letter to the Foreign Ministry. This letter, which reached the Minister of Foreign Affairs, urged Mexican authorities to take action and highlighted the family's feelings of helplessness regarding their daughter's death. Edgardo pointed out that the investigation was poorly conducted. Basic protocols were not followed. The boyfriend was not arrested. His phone was not seized. Toxicology tests were not performed, and no injuries were examined. Additionally, the family struggled to access the case details, despite the Argentine consulate's attempts to obtain records of the proceedings. These efforts were unsuccessful. Edgardo noted that the Foreign Ministry is required to investigate and address violence against women and to ensure the family receives clarity about Agostina's death. In this case, the ministry's involvement is crucial because, under the current investigation conditions in Mexico, Juan is free to act. Since Juan's legal status is not at risk, he is viewed as a person of interest rather than a fugitive. It's important to remember that both Agostina and Juan are Argentine citizens, and the Foreign Ministry must safeguard the rights of both, even if it turns out that Juan committed the crime alleged by Agostina's family. Colina, Agostina's mother, launched a media campaign to seek justice and pressure Mexican authorities. She spoke out about the abusive relationship between her daughter and her partner. In a televised interview, Colina claimed that Agostina was killed by her boyfriend and detailed how her daughter had been tortured, abused, and beaten, including receiving blows to the head before her death. Colina believed that he had faked the incident, making it look like Agostina hanged herself with a towel rack. She noted that Agostina had been dressed and ready to go out when Candela found her. According to Colina, no one who is considering end one's own life would take the time to get dressed. Colina recalled that Juan had a violent past. During a press conference shared on social media, she disclosed that Juan and Agostina had been facing ongoing issues that they had kept hidden. She expressed that she never trusted him and mentioned that 2 years earlier they had to rescue Agostina from the apartment she shared with Juan after he physically assaulted her. Colina emphasized that if they hadn't intervened that day, her daughter might have lost her life. Following that incident, Agostina decided not to report it, and her parents chose to respect her choice, even though they felt it was important to report such events to the authorities. The impact of not taking action at that time was felt 2 years later in Mexico. On Friday, February 17, at 2:30 p.m., Agostina sent a message to her mother expressing feelings of low self-worth and saying she didn't deserve to be with someone who would hurt her. Colina offered her support from a distance and encouraged Agostina to leave the apartment. Colina believed Agostina made a risky decision by going back to the violent man, which ultimately led to a bad outcome. Sadly, Juan Manuel's parents had reached out to the family and promised to help, but communication ceased when Juan failed to attend a scheduled Zoom meeting to explain his side of the story. Colina stated that Juan had been evading contact, but suspected he was still monitoring the situation to stay updated. She thought he would have shared his perspective if he had nothing to hide. Angry and frustrated, she claimed that Juan's parents were responsible for hiding what she saw as a monstrous act. On March 8th, International Women's Day, marches took place in Mexico and Argentina, demanding justice for Agostina. This intensified pressure on the Mexican prosecutor's office, which then announced an investigation into the death of the Argentine model as a potential femicide. The decision was influenced by the autopsy report, which revealed signs of head and facial injuries, multiple cuts on the body, and bruises indicating possible abuse. A forensic expert hired by the Jalabert family reviewed the official report and pointed out various signs of violence, including punch marks on the mouth and a significant head injury. The expert also noted cuts on several parts of the body, internal and external bruises, suggesting recent non-consensual abuse activity. Unfortunately, the only evidence available is this forensic report, because the Mexican authorities cremated Agostina's body shortly after classifying the case as an end one's own life. After the protests on International Women's Day, the Mexican justice system announced that it has reclassified the case. The family's lawyer confirmed that the case has been transferred to a specialized unit that deals with such matters. She accused the main suspect, Juan Reverter, of trying to stage a end one's own life case and pointed out signs of violence at the crime scene. The apartment was locked from the inside, and both the victim and her partner had visible injuries. A leg from a table was found out of place on the floor, and 2 calls were made to the police the night before. The lawyer criticized the judicial investigation, stating that the crime scene was not properly secured, which goes against established protocol. It is crucial that both the scene and the victim's body be preserved until the investigation is complete. She also noted that due to various mistakes, information that could have been accessed from the devices was lost, as the suspect took the cell phones and all related data with him. The investigation into Agostina's death in Mexico is proving to be difficult for her family, who are monitoring the situation from Argentina, over 7,000 kilometers away, facing different legal and cultural challenges. On March 13, 2023, the prosecutor from Quintana Roo stated during a press conference that Agostina, an Argentine model and influencer, had died by end her own life. He mentioned a history of violence in her relationship with her partner, raising the possibility that Juan may have played a role in her decision to take her life, which could now be part of the investigation. When asked by reporters about the cigarette burns found on Agostina's body, the prosecutor claimed those injuries were inflicted before her death. He indicated that there had been a violent incident between her and her partner the night prior, and there is substantial evidence to support this. The prosecutor mentioned that Juan had been questioned by the investigative police, but there was not enough evidence at that time for an arrest or any legal action against him. Nevertheless, this did not rule out the possibility of him being pursued later if connections to Agostina's death were uncovered. Edgardo, Agostina's father, argued for a change in how the case was classified, stating that their lawyer had found several pieces of evidence that warranted classifying it as femicide. German, the victim's uncle, noted that the Attorney General was pushing the end her own life theory because recognizing the evidence suggesting femicide would mean admitting to their shortcomings. He felt that the prosecution had acted carelessly and too quickly in the investigation's early phases, resulting in important evidence being lost. A journalist mentioned that the prosecutor's office would need to interview the boyfriend as part of the investigation, especially if the case leads to an end her own life. This means he will be required to provide statements to help clarify the situation. Additionally, the journalist noted that the crime was discovered over the weekend, a time when interns and junior investigators usually manage the inquiries in Mexico. This may have contributed to the mishandling of the case. He believes that their errors were not intentional but stemmed from inexperience, which impacted the way the investigation was conducted. A few days, news emerged in Argentina about a call received by Agostina's father. Edgardo, a prosecutor from Quintana Roo, reached out to him at the request of the state prosecutor's office. They wanted to discuss the situation with the family. The caller expressed that the system wished to apologize for what had occurred. They assured that if Agostina's boyfriend was found responsible, they would pursue legal action, emphasizing that there was no intention to conceal anything by the prosecutor's office. They also stated that if any public official from the prosecutor's office was found accountable, appropriate actions would be taken. Additionally, the caller mentioned that they would arrange a meeting with the general prosecutor and a team of experts to show Edgardo the evidence they had. They clarified that the general prosecutor had directed other state agencies in Mexico to re-evaluate the autopsy as well. The latest update was provided at the end of March, just a few days before the one-month anniversary of Agostina's death. The case has been moved to the Women's Crimes Division, which means Agostina's case is now being treated as one involving femicide and gender violence. The lawyer is collaborating with the prosecutor assigned to the case and is focusing on gathering evidence to support the femicide angle, as well as examining Juan's potential involvement. She expressed regret for not being able to share more information, but indicated that all evidence related to the murder is currently sealed. The lawyer explained that Juan's arrest timeline will depend on the investigation's findings. It is the prosecutor's responsibility to decide whether there is enough evidence or if additional evidence is required. Despite this, the lawyer expressed confidence in her ability to prove their case. The Mexican justice system has not issued an arrest warrant for him, and no legal actions have been initiated in Argentina since the alleged crime took place in another country. While he is not in custody, he has kept a low profile and has not confronted the family of the girlfriend he reportedly loved and lived with until her death. This case is still being developed, and since it is at an early stage, many processes are being carried out privately and out of the public eye. The prosecutor's office, which is investigating the suspected femicide, has issued a document to find Juan Reverter. This order, issued on June 7, 2023, by the Specialized Prosecutor's Office, focused on femicide cases, aims to search for and locate Juan and ask him to come in for questioning without taking away his freedom. The goal is to conduct a more thorough interview to gather additional information and meet the requirements set by the authorities.
It was a cold, quiet night, but something frightening was about to unfold in the woods near Altrincham. A car stopped on the deserted road. The driver, a 19-year-old, got out and looked around nervously. In the passenger seat was Alex Rada, only 15 years old and unaware that this night would change his life forever. What began as a secret between them had grown into something dangerous. Trust had been broken, emotions were running high, soon everything would take a deadly turn. But what really happened that night? The Rhoda family enjoyed a quiet and happy life in a village in Cheshire, northeastern England. Their home was warm and welcoming, shared by Lisa, her husband Adam, and their first child, Adam Jr. For many years, they had hoped to grow their family. Nearly a decade later, their dream was realized in what Lisa called a miraculous event. On March 5, 2004, they welcomed their second son, Alex Rada. As Alex grew up, Lisa noticed he had interests that were different from many other children. He enjoyed playing with her makeup and handbags. When he turned 13, Alex bravely told his parents a personal truth: he was gay. Lisa and Adam had suspected this for a while and welcomed his disclosure with open arms, offering their full support. However, Adam was worried, not about Alex's identity, but about how society might react to him. Unfortunately, his concerns were valid. At school, Alex faced teasing from some classmates, especially from boys who had difficulty accepting those who didn't fit their expectations. Despite this, Alex remained confident. Unlike many of his peers, he never felt the need to hide who he was. At Holmes Chapel Comprehensive School, Alex formed a close group of friends, predominantly girls. They cared for him deeply and supported him completely. These friendships acted as a shield when he faced unkindness, helping him thrive without letting negativity affect him. Full of joy and confidence, Alex was known for his infectious laughter. A bright student, he was also very active on social media, where he enjoyed sharing snippets of his life, his singing, dancing, and laughter. One of his accounts had gained over 4,000 followers. He had a uniquely close relationship with his father, one that resembled friendship. By the time Alex turned 15, he had become quite popular, with his phone frequently buzzing with messages from friends and admirers. However, one message he received one evening particularly caught his attention. It was from Matthew Mason, an older boy known for his mysterious online presence. Something about it made Alex pause. Matthew was a 19-year-old from the neighboring town of Ollerton. He grew up in a wealthy and religious family, living on a large estate valued in the millions. Every Sunday, they attended church together. At school, Matthew was known for being composed. Like Alex, he graduated from Holmes Chapel Secondary and went on to study agricultural engineering. He was a member of the Young Farmers Organization and worked part-time as an apprentice mechanic. In his spare time, he enjoyed fishing with his father, with whom he had a strong bond. At that time, Matthew was also dating a girl named Caitlin Lancashire. In October 2019, Alex shared with Georgia, one of his closest friends, that he had been receiving messages from Matthew. Georgia was surprised because she had known Matthew from school and had never seen him show any interest in men or suggest that he was bisexual. The situation felt strange. Alex and Matthew were from completely different backgrounds. They had never associated with each other socially. Without social media, they might never have met. Georgia warned Alex to be cautious. However, as the messages kept coming, Alex began to feel excited. He added Matthew as a friend on a social media platform, and their conversations quickly became more frequent. For Alex, this felt like the start of something special, his first experience with love. He had never been in a relationship before, and it was exhilarating, as if he was entering a whole new world. Initially, Alex and Matthew's exchanges were light, casual, but over time, they grew flirtatious and more intimate. Matthew complimented Alex's looks. Soon they began sharing photos. One night, after drinking too much at a bar, Matthew made a poor choice. He sent Alex an explicit photo of himself. Alex's friends noted that he often didn't understand the seriousness of situations, seeing them as jokes. Because of this, he viewed Matthew's message as part of a playful flirtation. Things became more serious when Matthew sent a video of a compromising nature. As their online relationship grew, Matthew proposed they meet in person and offered to pick Alex up, but Alex declined, saying his father wouldn't allow it. Despite this, they continued to exchange hundreds of messages. Wanting to know more about Matthew, Alex looked into his social media accounts, only to discover that Matthew was already in a relationship. This revelation filled Alex with frustration and doubt, making him question everything between them. Determined to find out the truth, Alex messaged Matthew's girlfriend, Caitlin, the girl he had seen in several of Matthew's posts. On November 3rd, Alex asked Caitlin if she was dating Matthew. When she confirmed it, Alex revealed that he had been secretly involved with Matthew for the past 2 to 3 weeks. Caitlin was stunned. Alex shared details of their explicit conversations and explained that he only learned about Matthew's relationship after investigating him online. According to media reports, jealousy was a significant factor in Alex's actions. An hour after speaking with Caitlin, Alex confronted Matthew, informing him that he had told Caitlin the truth. Alex's frustration was evident as he accused Matthew of being deceptive, both to Caitlin and to him. He insisted that Matthew needed to be honest because Caitlin deserved it after 2 years together. But Alex had already made the decision to reveal the truth himself. Matthew, who came from a strict religious background, was extremely afraid of his secrets getting out by Alex. In a panic, he denied any accusations to Caitlin and called Alex a liar. This marked a troubling change in the relationship between Alex and Matthew. Feeling trapped, Alex threatened to leak an explicit photo he had of Matthew. Reports indicate that later that same day, Matthew made Alex a beneficiary on his bank account and transferred over £50 to him. By this point, Caitlin had already ended her relationship with Matthew. Despite their issues, on November 9th, Alex and Matthew met in person for the first time and became physically involved. Their secret relationship continued over the next 2 weeks. While everything seemed fine to outsiders, the payments to Alex didn't cease. Matthew was not ready for the truth to surface, but everything came to a head on December 12, 2019. After weeks of threats and pressure, Matthew lost control. On that cold, rainy night, he picked Alex up from his home and drove him to a remote forested area near Altrincham, claiming they were going to have another intimate encounter. However, once they arrived, Matthew violently attacked Alex with a wrench he had brought along. After committing this brutal act, Matthew drove to a friend's farm, hoping to destroy any evidence linking him to the crime. To create an alibi, he then casually went to 2 different bars, meeting friends for drinks as if nothing had happened. At one bar, he took a selfie and shared it on social media, further emphasizing his facade of a typical night out. Later, he even took a picture of himself smiling in bed, with his bare torso showing, which he sent to Caitlin to strengthen his alibi. In the middle of the night, he discovered Alex's phone on the passenger seat of his car. Aware of the damaging information it contained, he quickly disposed of it. As the night went on, Matthew returned to the forest. He attempted to move Alex's lifeless body to the roadside and tried to lift him into his Renault Clio. However, after several unsuccessful attempts, he abandoned the body there and walked away. Alex's parents were becoming more and more worried about his disappearance. After they were unable to contact him, they reported him as missing. Soon, the police, friends, and family were all frantically searching for him. A police officer from Cheshire texted Matthew, asking him to reach out regarding Alex's disappearance. By morning, the stark reality emerged. Garbage collectors stumbled upon Alex's severely disfigured body, found half-naked and bearing multiple wounds. When law enforcement arrived at the forest crime scene, they discovered that Alex had endured at least 15 blows to the head in what officials labeled a brutal and ruthless attack. A witness had unknowingly implicated him the night before. A photo of a vehicle parked by the roadside was taken, and when the police traced it, they linked it to Matthew. On November 13th, just before noon, officers arrested him on a highway nearby. Despite his efforts to remove the evidence, dried blood was still evident on his car. A search of his car's trunk revealed a garbage bag filled with incriminating items, a blood-stained green sweater, the wrench used in Alex's attack, and a large padded jacket that belonged to Alex. With compelling evidence against him, Matthew was taken into custody and formally charged with the crime. Investigators traced the unfortunate path of Alex and Matthew's relationship, which began with curiosity but ended in horrific violence. Their online interactions often focused on money, culminating in a crucial conversation moments before Alex's violent death. Records indicate that after an initial payment, Matthew had sent Alex a total of £1,270, supposedly for their meetings and to guarantee his silence. The final payment of £100 was sent just 5 days before the murder. As the investigation continued, unsettling new information came to light. Matthew's internet search history revealed his disturbing mindset. He had looked up methods to kill someone. His searches included queries like what happens if you push someone down the stairs, as well as information on poisons and unsolved missing person cases in Cheshire. One of Alex's friends mentioned that when Matthew first contacted Alex to set up their last meeting, Alex was excited. However, after a second phone call, he started to feel uneasy. Alex even texted his friend, questioning whether it was odd that the meeting was in a secret, special location. By that time, Alex sensed that something was wrong. Despite his concerns, he ultimately decided to go, likely because he needed the money. Moments after entering Matthew's car, Alex shared one final image on his social media story. It was a simple photo of the car's interior with a small heart emoji at the bottom, this was the last message Alex ever posted. His closest friends, who often discussed his new relationship with him, grew increasingly concerned over time, particularly because he kept asking for more money. At one point, Matthew told Alex that he was having financial difficulties and could no longer send Alex money. However, shortly after that, he transferred nearly £700 to Alex. Alex's friends, whose names are kept confidential for legal reasons, later informed the police that they were aware of the wrongdoing and had expressed their concerns to Matthew. Despite their advice, Alex decided to continue with his actions. The trial started on January 25, 2021, at Chester Crown Court. The jury learned that the two individuals had only known each other for a few months but had been involved in a secret and illegal relationship during that period. Under English law, a relationship between a 15-year-old and a 19-year-old is considered unlawful because the age of consent is 16. This means that any intimate activity involving someone under 16 is strictly prohibited, regardless of their willingness. During his testimony in court, Matthew acknowledged hitting Alex with a wrench but sought to explain his actions by saying he lost control due to being blackmailed by Alex. He described their initial interactions, which began in October 2019 with casual conversations. Over time, however, Alex reportedly started sending late-night messages that included personal and suggestive inquiries, such as whether Matthew was clothed. He also claimed that Alex had attempted to attack him prior to his death. Matthew mentioned that he was struggling financially and had lost friends, family as a result of the situation. Although he did not clearly specify what the payments were for, he insisted that he was under immense pressure. Furthermore, he expressed feelings of shame and discomfort after becoming intimate with Alex. At one point, Matthew recognized that his actions were wrong, not only because Alex was male but also due to his age. During the trial, prosecutors shared all the details of Alex's conversations with Caitlin, who was Matthew's girlfriend at the time. One of the detectives strongly disagreed with Matthew's assertion that the murder was spontaneous. The detective argued instead that Matthew had carefully planned the attack and had tricked Alex into going to a secluded place, thinking that no one would discover his intentions. During the victim impact statements, Alex's parents, Adam and Lisa, honored their son with heartfelt words, describing him as a beautiful and loving child. Through tears, Lisa shared that losing a child in such a horrific way felt like living in hell. She highlighted that Alex was raised in a loving environment, not a fearful one, and he was always proud of himself, never needing to hide or pretend. Lisa condemned Matthew's actions, noting that despite his early admission of guilt, Matthew put their family through additional trauma in a selfish effort to lessen his sentence. She expressed that he didn't consider the immense pain he caused both families. Lisa described Matthew as the most selfish and calculating person she had ever met, criticizing his attempts to blame Alex and tarnish his reputation. During the trial, Adam reflected on his son as a cheerful and respectful young man who always considered other people's feelings. He acknowledged that he could never fully recover from the loss and that their lives would be forever changed. After a month-long trial and over 9 hours of jury deliberation, the jury rejected Matthew's account of the events and found him guilty by a majority vote of 10-2. As he sat in the defendant's chair, crying, the judge announced his sentence. Because he used a weapon during the crime, the mandatory minimum sentence was set at 25 years. The judge characterized the murder as premeditated, indicating it was carefully planned and executed with no remorse. He noted that although Alex may have initiated contact, Matthew not only responded but also actively encouraged an intimate relationship. The judge emphasized that Matthew was significantly more experienced than Alex, who was still young and emotionally immature. Additionally, he stated that Matthew had intentionally created the situation. While this was not Matthew's first intimate experience, it was Alex's first. The judge concluded that Alex's naive demands were influenced by the intimate offenses committed by Matthew, so the responsibility for what happened did not lie with Alex. In deciding Matthew's sentence, the judge emphasized his total lack of empathy, his complete disregard for the victim and the victim's grieving family. As a result, in January 2021, he was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 28 years before being eligible for parole. However, on June 2021, Matthew's legal team filed an appeal against this sentence. After considering both written and oral arguments, a panel of 3 appellate judges concluded that the original sentence was too long and reduced the minimum term from 28 years to 26 years. Matthew faced a deep internal conflict as he struggled to accept his own gender and feared rejection. This unresolved conflict caused him unimaginable pain and destruction. In his desperate attempt to avoid confronting his reality, he not only compromised his own future but also hurt someone who accepted him without shame or fear. In March 2007, the peaceful life of a young English teacher in Japan changed dramatically when she mysteriously vanished. Lindsay Ann Hawker, a 22-year-old full of promise and dreams, had come to Japan to start an exciting new chapter. However, what began as a hopeful adventure quickly turned into a tragic situation. A chance meeting with a man with sinister motives turned her otherwise enriching experience into a nightmare. As days passed without any news from Lindsay, her colleagues and family grew increasingly worried. Investigators looking into her last known whereabouts discovered a chilling series of events that led them to a shocking crime scene and a clever suspect who managed to evade capture for years. What truly happened to Lindsay? The search for answers would capture the world's attention and reveal the hidden dangers in what appeared to be a safe environment. Lindsay Ann Hawker was born on December 30, 1984, in Coventry, England, to Bill and Julia Hawker. She was the second of 3 siblings and grew up in a nurturing home. From a young age, Lindsay showed remarkable selflessness and compassion, which made her well loved by her classmates and teachers at King Henry VIII School. Former headmaster remembered her as someone who always put others' needs first. Lindsay's kindness went beyond school, as she also volunteered at a local primary school, teaching swimming to children with disabilities. Lindsay was a dedicated reader who often lost herself in books at the library for hours. In 2003, she began studying biology at the University of Leeds, where her hard work and intelligence earned her a first-class degree in 2006. Although she wanted to pursue a master's degree, she preferred to gain practical experience first. Lindsay was an ambitious and lively young woman with a deep love for life. She and her boyfriend had always dreamed of traveling the world together for a year. However, when she got a great opportunity to teach in Tokyo, Japan, she accepted the job and postponed their travels. Her boyfriend planned to join her the following summer to start their long-awaited adventure around the globe. Lindsay was filled with excitement as she prepared for her new adventure in Tokyo, determined to respect the local culture. Before her departure in October 2006, she spent time learning about Japanese customs. At just 22 years old, she arrived in Japan to start a year-long teaching position at Nova, the country's largest private English school, located in Chiba. She reassured her family that Tokyo was a safe and welcoming city. She eagerly looked forward to embracing her new life while building lasting friendships. Although she was thousands of miles away from home, Lindsay remained closely connected with her loved ones in England, regularly using Facebook, WhatsApp, Skype, and phone calls to keep in touch. She was thriving in Japan, adapting well to her new environment. Lindsay shared an apartment in Chiba with 2 fellow teachers, one from Australia and another from Canada, who quickly became her close friends. 3 months after her arrival, in December 2006, Lindsay's parents, Bill and Julia, and her younger sister traveled to Japan to celebrate her birthday. They celebrated at the famous bar in the Tokyo Park Hyatt. That night, filled with love and laughter, became a treasured memory for Lindsay's family. Tragically, it was the last time they would ever meet her alive. One evening in March 2007, as Lindsay finished her workday and began her journey home, she had a troubling encounter. After taking the train back to Chiba Station, where she normally parked her bicycle, a young man approached her, falsely claiming to be one of her students. Lindsay, who knew all of her students by name, immediately realized he was lying. While she unlocked her bike to ride home, the stranger continued talking to her and followed her as she cycled away, asking numerous questions about her background and clearly trying to keep her engaged. When Lindsay arrived at her apartment, the man made an unusual request for a glass of water. Sensing no immediate danger and knowing that her 2 roommates went be home, she decided to let him in. Once inside, she introduced him to her roommates, and he asked about private English lessons. According to Nova's rules, tutoring outside of work was permitted if done in a public place and if a record of the student's details was kept. Lindsay agreed to meet him at a cafe and set her usual fee at 3,500 yen, about $32 per hour, which she had charged other students in the past. As he was leaving, he gave her a slip of paper with his name, Tatsuya Ichihashi, along with his email and phone number. To Lindsay's surprise, he had also drawn a portrait of her on the same sheet, which was an unexpected addition to their brief meeting. Tatsuya Ichihashi was born on January 5, 1979, into a privileged family and spent his childhood in Gifu. His parents had demanding medical careers. His father was a doctor, and his mother was a dentist. Although he grew up in a wealthy environment and hoped to follow his father's career path, his academic results were disappointing, preventing him from entering the medical field. After graduating from Chiba University, Ichihashi lacked ambition and relied on his family's wealth instead of finding a job. With a monthly allowance of 100,000 yen, about $920, he lived an unproductive life, appearing content to simply drift along without direction. Former classmates described him as socially withdrawn and fixated on violent manga, while his girlfriend portrayed him as serious and stable. Although he had no formal criminal record, there were concerning signs. He had once been a suspect in an assault and robbery case involving a woman. This incident was never reported to the authorities because his father paid her 1 million yen, approximately $6,800, to drop the matter. Tatsuya Ichihashi was very dedicated to physical fitness, reportedly cycling over 15 miles daily as part of his rigorous workout routine. However, while he was physically strong, his mental health was deteriorating. He shared with friends that he felt increasingly unstable but never sought professional help for his mental issues. Lindsay Hawker's last moments seemed ordinary, but they led to a shocking disappearance. On March 24th, she left her apartment to meet Tatsuya Ichihashi at a cafe for a private English lesson they had scheduled. The meeting seemed to go smoothly until Tatsuya asked her to come with him to his apartment nearby, saying he had forgotten his wallet and needed to pay her. Trusting him, Lindsay agreed, and they took a short taxi ride. When she arrived, she told the driver that she would be back in the car in just a few minutes. However, those minutes turned into an unsettling silence. After waiting for 7 minutes without her return, the taxi driver left, unaware that he had just seen Lindsay Hawker for the last time. Lindsay was living away from home but kept in regular contact with her family and friends in England. When Saturday passed without hearing from her, they thought she was just busy. However, by Sunday, March 25th, they started to worry, as this lack of communication was unusual for her. Back in Japan, her co-workers at Nova grew concerned when she didn't show up for her classes, which was out of character for her. By Monday, March 26th, their worry escalated into panic. Nova staff informed Lindsay's father about her absence, and her roommates reported her missing to the police. At 2:30 p.m., the search for Lindsay Hawker officially began, but the reality of what had happened would turn out to be more shocking than anyone anticipated. The investigation started by examining the available CCTV footage, which provided important insights. In the hours before Lindsay Hawker went missing, the cameras captured her and Tatsuya Ichihashi at the cafe. The footage recorded everything from their drink orders to the personal conversation during her private English lesson with him. It also captured their departure from the cafe and their ride in a taxi to Tatsuya's apartment. After they were dropped off, the taxi waited for 7 minutes because Lindsay had asked the driver to stay parked. However, as time went by and she did not return, the driver eventually left. The next morning, police interviewed Lindsay's roommates, who described a disturbing encounter with a strange man who had come to their apartment. They mentioned that Lindsay had planned to give him private English lessons and provided his contact information written on a piece of paper. At 5:40 p.m., 2 officers were sent to Tatsuya Ichihashi's apartment building in Ichikawa, a quiet suburb near Tokyo. Without enough evidence to enter, the officers relied on the help of his neighbors, who allowed them to access their balcony to look into his living room. Although the lights were off, they could see that someone was inside. What stood out to them was that the bathtub, which is usually fixed in place, was strangely located on the balcony. Given Tatsuya's previous legal issues and their suspicion that he might be holding Lindsay against her will, the police called for additional support. At 7 p.m., 9 officers were positioned outside his building. When Tatsuya unexpectedly came out barefoot and with a backpack, he ran away. Even without shoes, he dashed through the streets and managed to escape the pursuing officers. One officer caught his backpack, which only contained gym clothes. However, Tatsuya quickly jumped off the stairs and blended into the busy streets, avoiding capture. As the police entered Tatsuya's apartment, they went straight to the balcony to examine an oddly placed bathtub. Upon investigation, they found the bathtub filled with a troubling mixture of soil and sand. To their horror, a small white hand was visible above the soil, leading them to the discovery of Lindsay's lifeless naked body. Tatsuya had attempted to hide his horrific crime by mixing a decomposition agent into the soil and planting flower seeds on top, making it look like a harmless flower bed. Lindsay had been gagged with a scarf, her hands and feet were tightly bound with gardening ties. Disturbingly, her head had been shaved, her hair was found stuffed in a nearby plastic bag. The apartment also held various wigs, raising suspicions that Tatsuya might be transgender and intended to use Lindsay's hair for himself. The post-mortem revealed the tragic truth: Lindsay had been strangled. When her body was discovered, it showed evidence of a fierce struggle. Her upper body had large, bag-sized bruises, likely from numerous punches during a prolonged attack. Other marks indicated that she had been kicked or hit with a blunt object, and there were signs she had been slammed into furniture in her apartment. The defensive wounds on her arms indicated that Lindsay fought hard to defend herself, but in the end, she was overpowered and strangled. Neighbors reported hearing disturbing sounds on the night she went missing, such as loud thumps resembling heavy objects hitting metal, followed by noises that sounded like dragging. Investigators found out that Tatsuya had visited a local hardware store multiple times. He bought items like the soil and sand that were later discovered in the bathtub, which suggested the murder was premeditated. Meanwhile, Bill was heading to Tokyo to identify his daughter. Upon seeing her, he instantly recognized it was Lindsay. "She was my daughter. She was so tall and beautiful. She had been beaten so badly. My life and my soul just shattered," he shared with the media, his heart breaking at the sight of her. Tatsuya was still on the run, and authorities were actively trying to find him. They distributed wanted posters showing him in different disguises, including as a woman, across the country. However, despite thorough searches, the investigation was progressing slowly. A raid on a hotel close to his home was unsuccessful, and reported sightings in Kabuki-cho led to nothing. By March 2009, marking the second anniversary of Lindsay's tragic death, the search for her killer had not produced any results. In a final effort to raise awareness, life-sized cutouts of Tatsuya were created, but they had little effect on the investigation. In November 2009, authorities finally made a significant breakthrough in the search for Tatsuya. He was identified at a cosmetic surgery clinic in Nagoya, where he had undergone a procedure to slim and lengthen his nose. This was not his first attempt to change his looks. Tatsuya had performed several surgeries on himself in a desperate bid to avoid being caught. He had made his lower lip thinner, altered his eyelids, and removed visible moles from his wanted posters. However, some moles still remained, and this discrepancy led the clinic to recognize him. They sent photos of Tatsuya's altered appearance to the police. In response, authorities released a photo of him taken before and after his latest surgery, warning the public about his changed appearance. As the media showcased his new appearance, Tatsuya realized that the investigation was picking up pace. To evade capture, he bought a disguise that included a beard, sideburns, and a mustache. Despite his attempts to blend in, a sharp-eyed member of the public recognized him. After more than 2 years on the run, Tatsuya's situation changed on November 10, 2009, when investigators received an anonymous tip about a man resembling the fugitive at a ferry terminal. Officers quickly responded and arrested him in Osaka as he tried to board a ferry to Okinawa. His identity was confirmed through fingerprint analysis once he was in custody. At first, Tatsuya remained silent and uncooperative during the early days of his detention. However, when faced with the possibility of the death penalty, He ultimately confessed to killing Lindsay but claimed that it was not deliberate. In July 2011, when Tatsuya's trial started, he focused on a defense claiming that Lindsay's death was accidental. On the witness stand, he recounted the terrible events of that day, stating that he had unintentionally strangled her while trying to quiet her screams during the attack. He even claimed in court, in front of Lindsay's mourning family, that he attempted to revive her after realizing she was no longer breathing. Before the trial began, Tatsuya wrote a letter to Lindsay's family seeking their forgiveness, aware that this gesture could lead to a lighter sentence in Japan. In the letter, he conveyed his deep regret, stating, "I alone am to blame. I will take full responsibility. I will never forget what I did to her, and I will carry this burden for the rest of my life." He expressed sorrow for the impact of his actions, saying that he not only ruined her life but also altered theirs, and acknowledged that he would likely never be forgiven. On July 21, 2011, the Chiba District Court sentenced Ichihashi to life in prison for the murder of Lindsay and Hawker. Although Hawker's family requested the death penalty, the court deemed it inappropriate, considering Ichihashi's clean criminal record and the fact that, at 32 years old, he still had a chance for rehabilitation. In Japan, capital punishment is rarely applied in cases involving a single victim. Additionally, Tatsuya's youth and clean record led authorities to consider the possibility of rehabilitation, although it remains unclear if he can truly be rehabilitated. In April 2012, Tatsuya's defense team filed an appeal, arguing once more that Lindsay's death was an unfortunate accident. However, the court reaffirmed its original decision, stating that Tatsuya had acted with intent and that the murder was premeditated. His appeal was quickly denied. Tatsuya Ichihashi became eligible for parole in 2022, but there is no public information indicating that he has been considered for release. In Japan, inmates serving life sentences can apply for parole after 10 years, but the likelihood of approval depends on their behavior and perceived rehabilitation while incarcerated. The tragic disappearance of Lindsay and Hawker has left a lasting impact on her family, friends, and many others who followed her distressing story. Lindsay was a vibrant young woman full of promise. Her kindness and ambition taken from the world in a shocking act of violence. For years, her loved ones endured the pain of uncertainty and the agonizing wait for justice. With unwavering determination, Lindsay's family relentlessly urged authorities to act, their voices united in hope and resilience, which ultimately led to the capture and conviction of her murderer. However, even after the verdict, no sentence could heal the deep sorrow of losing her. Lindsay's story highlights the hidden dangers, reminding us of the importance of staying alert in our lives. It also demonstrates the incredible strength of a family that would not give up, ensuring that Lindsay's memory lives on. As of 2023, Ichihashi is serving his sentence at Nagano Prison. On July 29, 2016, Gabriella and her younger sister, Sunilda, started their day as usual. That evening, they planned to visit a nearby internet cafe to work on some school assignments. Because they didn't have internet at home, these trips to the local cafe had become a regular part of their lives. Going to the cafe was how they accessed the internet to stay connected and complete their assignments. Around 6 p.m., Gabriella and Sunilda left the house as usual, without causing any concern. But after walking a few blocks, Gabriella abruptly changed her mind. She told Sunilda that she wouldn't be accompanying her and that she was going to see her boyfriend instead. Sunilda was a little surprised but didn't ask any questions. Gabriella had gone off alone before. Gabriella assured her she would return soon, then walked away in the opposite direction. That was the last time the two sisters saw each other. Sunilda went to the cafe by herself. That evening, when she got home, she realized that Gabriella still wasn't back yet. Al principio, nadie le dio mucha importancia. Es como que los adolescentes se queden fuera hasta tarde, especialmente en verano. Sin embargo, a medida que anochecia, la preocupación empezó a aumentar. Liliana, their mother, tried to call Gabriella but got no answer. She sent messages on WhatsApp, which at first were not read. Later, the messages appeared as read, but Gabriella never replied. It was clear someone was seeing the messages, but not responding. Panic set in when a young man, whom the family believed to be Gabriella's boyfriend, showed up at their door. He asked a question that stunned everyone, because they had all assumed that Gabriella was with him. His confusion seemed real. He truly didn't know where she was. That moment changed everything. Until then, everyone had just thought Gabriella was out later than usual. If her boyfriend hadn't seen her that night, it's possible she never made it to meet him. That's when her family realized something was wrong. Sunilda remembered watching Gabriella turn a corner in the direction of a boarding house where one of their relatives had once lived. At the time, it hadn't seemed significant. The next morning, it was obvious that Gabriella was missing. Her phone was still active, but she didn't answer any calls. The mood at home grew tense. Her loved ones started reaching out to everyone they knew, relatives, friends, even her father, but nobody knew where she was. It seemed as though she had vanished without a trace. The family decided to take official action. Liliana contacted the local authorities, who then opened the missing person case. Soon after, flyers about the case were posted around the neighborhood. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers helped with the search. However, after Gabriella turned the corner and left her sister behind, no one saw her again. Gabriella Verol was born in Argentina in 1998 to Bolivian parents. Her parents separated when she was 6 years old. After her parents separated, Gabriella lived with her mother, Liliana Cham, and later started calling another man, Cesar Garcia, her father. He became her stepfather. Sunilda and other relatives from Liliana's family also lived in the same house. Life at home was difficult. The family made great efforts to create a stable home and meet their basic needs, but the atmosphere was often tense and arguments happened frequently. Gabriella frequently had stressful encounters with her grandmother, and their arguments were much more heated than typical family disputes. The adults were emotionally distant and didn't understand her, which constantly made her feel under pressure. During her teenage years, Gabriella faced the typical challenges of growing up. However, living in a home without personal space or privacy made these difficulties even harder for her. She didn't have a good place to rest or study. She dreamed of living with her biological father, who lived apart from her with another family. Pero ese deseo nunca se cumplió. Al no mantuvo una comunicación constante y también estaba enfrentando sus propios problemas personales. Eventually, the situation at home became too difficult for Gabriella to handle. She decided to leave, taking her younger sister Sunilda with her. For a time, they stayed at the house of their Aunt Marisol, their father's sister. The two sisters hadn't planned to leave permanently or thought it through carefully, but their leaving was a sign that something was wrong. They stayed at their aunt's house for about a week. Life there was more peaceful and there was less strict adult supervision, but this brief period didn't result in any lasting changes. When Gabriella returned to her mother's house, she once again found herself surrounded by the same pressure and stress she had tried to get away from. Although Gabriella was quiet, she was clearly independent. She wore simple clothes, avoided drawing attention to herself, and stayed away from noisy or boisterous groups. However, she was still ambitious. She often envisioned a future in which she could shape her own life. Unfortunately, her limited resources made it difficult to pursue those dreams. She didn't have a computer or reliable internet access at home. Even basic things like homework required her to walk to the nearest internet cafe. As mentioned before, this demanded extra planning and often led to more stress at home. In addition to these daily difficulties, Gabriella also felt a strong sense of emotional distance. Her opinions were often ignored, and her needs were rarely prioritized. Even within her own family, she felt more like an outsider than a real member. She never openly argued with her mother, Liliana. However, Liliana was always so overwhelmed by her responsibilities that she often didn't notice what her daughter was experiencing. Gabriella's stepfather fulfilled his duties, but they never developed a close relationship. There was always a distance between them. Over the years, all of this made Gabriella feel increasingly isolated. She didn't feel safe at home, and she couldn't see any realistic way to find support or make a change outside of it. Life felt like a cycle she couldn't escape, where any progress depended entirely on her own efforts. At home, there was a shortage of resources, emotional support, and space for her to grow. Her desire for independence was no longer just a normal part of growing up, it became a true necessity. This mindset began to guide her choices and actions over time. Against this emotionally vulnerable but outwardly calm backdrop, a series of events began to unfold. These events would eventually lead to devastating consequences. Nestor Quintana, born in 1986, was married to Elizabeth Cham, who is Gabriella's maternal aunt. This marriage made Nestor a member of Gabriella's family, and they frequently saw each other, as they lived in the same household. For a long time, no one in the family had any concerns about his behavior. They saw him as calm, reliable, and responsible, with a respectable job at the Argentine prefecture, a federal security agency. He didn't raise any red flags. He stayed out of arguments, helped with household chores, and was present at family gatherings. He was a quiet part of everyday life. He lived with his wife and her family, ate meals with them, took part in family gatherings, and helped with daily chores. To those around him, he seemed like a reliable and discreet adult who handled family matters appropriately and never overstepped his boundaries. Over time, small, isolated incidents began to occur, minor things that didn't seem concerning at first, such as a strange remark or an odd situation. There was no single event, but these details gradually changed how people saw him. After he and Elizabeth separated, Nestor left the family home. He moved into a low-cost boarding house near the area where his family still lived. At the time, his relatives thought this was simply the usual thing to do after a marriage ended. This move marked a turning point. It began a new phase in which his behavior slowly changed from neutral to unsettling, even though no one could clearly describe why they felt uneasy. Even though Nestor no longer lived with the family, he still kept in touch with them, especially with Gabriella. As time passed, people started noticing that he was spending more and more time alone with her. These meetings took place outside the home, in neutral locations. Neighbors who witnessed these interactions were unsure how to interpret them. One man remembered seeing Gabriella and Nestor together on a bus. Gabriella was sitting on Nestor's lap while he softly stroked her hair. The man felt uncomfortable watching this but chose not to mention it to the family. He later admitted that he hesitated because he was afraid of causing a scene or damaging family relationships. He decided not to say anything. Other people in the neighborhood reported seeing similar things. Several residents had seen Gabriella near the boarding house where Nestor lived. At times, she would go into the building, remain there for an hour or two, and then leave quietly. No one expressed any concern when this happened. Because Nestor had once been married to Gabriella's aunt, no one thought their interactions were unusual at first. Their family relationship led people to trust them and not question their meetings. Gabriella never told anyone she visited him, and there was no obvious reason to suspect anything improper was happening. They also had no formal relationship. Nestor was not her guardian and had no legal right to be involved in her life. However, he was still somewhat connected to the family, so his actions were considered personal decisions and were not subject to supervision. Gabriella's family didn't keep track of where she was, believing she was either with friends or running errands. It was later revealed that many of their meetings took place at the boarding house where Nestor had rented a small room. He often invited Gabriella there, and they kept their visits private. She would arrive by herself and leave without drawing attention. Over time, their relationship changed in ways that went beyond simple familial affection. At the time, however, none of the adults realized how deep their connection had become. Even after his marriage to Elizabeth ended, Gabriella continued to seek contact with him. She never talked about what happened during those visits or shared any details with anyone. Only after she disappeared did people begin to understand the whole story, the clues they had previously missed. At first, there was no clear indication that Gabriella had any reason to keep secrets. She seemed calm and friendly around her relatives, but it later became clear that her relationship with Nestor was something she could not discuss openly. Reportedly, their connection began when Gabriella was just 13. At that point, Nestor was already a grown man, employed in a federal security role and married to her maternal aunt, which made the situation even more troubling. He was not just a stranger, he was a trusted adult in her home, connected to her family, and seen as safe by everyone around her. The first details of this story began to emerge when the investigation started. Friends who had never shown much interest in Gabriella's personal life began to comment. Several people admitted that they had suspected for years that something was wrong between her and Nestor. Some recalled seeing him repeatedly near Gabriella's school, offering her rides or finding reasons to be there. At first, his actions appeared to be motivated by concern, but over time they became more obsessive. The way he behaved was not what you would normally expect from a family member. He monitored her social life, tracked whom she spoke to, and showed signs of jealousy. Gabriella tried to maintain normal friendships, but Nestor's influence made her feel increasingly restricted. People close to her said that he constantly tried to contact her, often calling her repeatedly if she didn't answer immediately. Those who witnessed how urgently he needed to know her whereabouts at all times recognized this as a warning sign. In later messages used as evidence, he accused her of being distant, demanded explanations for her actions, and insisted that she account for how she spent her time when she wasn't with him. These were not isolated incidents, they formed a consistent pattern of controlling and obsessive behavior. Classmates remembered times when Gabriella would only attend events if he gave her permission. Initially, it appeared as if she was simply dealing with strict family rules or a difficult home situation. No one realized that the true reason was the pressure from an adult man who maintained a controlling environment around her. A close friend later recalled that Gabriella had once confided in her, saying she hadn't felt free in a long time and asking her to keep it a secret. At the time, it seemed like something typical a teenager might say. Later, those words would take on much deeper significance. Through the voice messages Nestor sent Gabriella, investigators made a disturbing discovery. He saw her as someone he possessed. In the recordings, his tone shifted between pleading and demanding. He accused her of cheating, doubted her honesty, and repeatedly insisted that she prove her loyalty. When Gabriella began spending time with someone her own age, Nestor started to act increasingly hostile. He made it clear that he could not tolerate her being close to anyone else, not even her friends. The investigation found that this caused tensions between them to escalate even further during that period. As Gabriella grew more distant, Nestor intensified his efforts to regain control. Meanwhile, her friends noticed that Gabriella's emotional well-being was deteriorating. She became increasingly anxious and withdrawn, and she stopped talking about her future. When she tried to leave Nestor, he responded by ramping up his manipulation. He pressured her psychologically, used emotional blackmail, made threats, and tried to make her feel guilty. Relatives living nearby had no idea this was happening. As investigators examined his actions more closely, a clear pattern emerged. He not only violated personal boundaries, but also purposely created a relationship of dependence by taking advantage of his age, his authority, and the trust the family placed in him. Gabriella's friends later confessed that, while they sensed something was wrong, they did not realize the seriousness of the situation. She remained silent out of fear, shame, and the conviction that no one would believe her if she told the truth. This silence allowed Nestor to maintain control over her for years. Gabriella grew up in a home without adequate support, which left her vulnerable. A man, initially only a relative, entered her life and gradually became a dominant presence from whom she could not escape. This situation paved the way for the tragedy that followed. After Gabriella went missing, the police launched an initial investigation. They questioned her sister, her mother, the young man she was dating, and several other acquaintances. Officers began searching the neighborhood and spoke with residents living within a few blocks of where Gabriella was last seen with her sister. Several witnesses reported seeing her later that evening walking down the street with a man. One witness specifically remembered seeing them heading toward the boarding house. Investigators believe that, given the time and place, Gabriella may have intentionally gone there. Meanwhile, some of Gabriella's friends, previously too afraid to speak up, began providing information. As more evidence was gathered, it became clear that Gabriella's disappearance was not accidental. There were no signs that she had run away or made a sudden decision to leave. She left without taking any belongings or informing anyone of her plans. After Nestor Quintana was identified as a person of interest, authorities brought him in for questioning. Initially, he appeared confident. He claimed he had not been in contact with the family for a long time, that he no longer knew anything about Gabriella's life, and that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. He explained that he stayed out of family matters because he and Elizabeth were divorced. At first, his answers seemed consistent. However, investigators soon found several contradictions. Neighbors and other residents reported seeing Nestor still meeting with Gabriella. Witnesses often saw them together near the boarding house, and her friends stated he behaved in a controlling manner, evidence that directly contradicted his previous statements. The investigators intensified their questioning. Nestor was summoned for additional interviews, and with each session, he grew less confident. He began muddling the timeline, changing his story, and avoiding direct questions. Even those who had initially believed he was not involved began to have doubts. The situation shifted noticeably a few days after the investigation gained momentum. Nestor arrived at the police station without prior notice and asked to speak with an officer. This time, he admitted to having had contact with Gabriella and claimed to know where she was. Then he made a confession that changed the whole investigation. He stated that, as on previous occasions, he met with Gabriella on the evening of July 29th. According to him, they had an argument that night. Nestor said the argument escalated and, during the struggle, he lost control and accidentally killed Gabriella by strangling her. He revealed the precise location of her body, explaining that he had hidden it in his room at the boarding house, wrapped in bed sheets and plastic. He claimed that he had acted impulsively during an emotional breakdown and had not planned the act in advance. Police quickly proceeded to the location he mentioned. There, in the room he had rented, investigators discovered Gabriella's body. It was carefully wrapped in several layers of fabric and plastic bags and placed in the corner of the room. Forensic specialists arrived at the scene, determining that the body had been in the room for several days. However, because the room was sealed, decomposition had been limited. Investigators collected all nearby items for forensic examination. An initial autopsy determined that the cause of death was manual strangulation. No signs of sexual assault were found, so investigators ruled out such a motive. However, the main question remained unanswered. If the motive was not sexual assault, what provoked such a violent reaction? Some believe the act resulted from long-term emotional stress, jealousy, and an adult's inability to accept Gabriella's growing independence. Only further interviews and psychological assessments could confirm whether this theory was correct. The authorities informed Gabriella's family of Nestor's confession. The shock was immense. Her mother, stepfather, and other relatives could not believe that someone they had lived with was capable of such an act. Nestor, once regarded as a caring uncle, had now admitted to causing her death. For many people, the news was more than just devastating. It completely destroyed their trust in those closest to them. Cesar Garcia, Gabriella's stepfather, told reporters that he was struggling to understand what had happened. He said that Nestor had never acted suspiciously and was always seen as a trustworthy, ordinary family member. Gabriella's sister, Sunsilda, did not make any public statements and remained in shock. Their mother was so overwhelmed by emotion that she burst into tears. The family's grief was made even worse by a profound sense of betrayal. Although Nestor confessed, the investigation continued. Law enforcement needed to confirm whether his statements were true and to ensure he was not withholding any other information. His claim that his actions were caused by an emotional outburst was questionable, especially since he had carefully concealed the body. Investigators also looked into whether Nestor was trying to minimize his role in order to receive a reduced sentence. This issue became part of the case as it proceeded to trial. After Gabriella's body was found and a confession was made, Nestor Quintana's case entered the formal criminal investigation stage, and he was officially charged. However, during the very first court hearing, the situation changed unexpectedly when Nestor suddenly retracted his confession. He stated that the police had pressured him, used psychological coercion, and had not properly informed him of his rights. This new statement formed the basis of his defense strategy. Neuster's lawyer promptly took action to dispute all evidence that had been gathered from the confession. He claimed that the boarding house was searched illegally because there was no valid warrant. The defense also requested the exclusion of text messages, voice recordings, and witness testimonies that were collected before a lawyer was present. They argued that Neuster was mentally unstable at the time and could not understand the consequences of his words. Prosecutors remained resolute. The lead attorney stressed that Neuster's confession was both voluntary and detailed. He also pointed out that Neuster provided exact directions to where Gabriella's body was found, arguing that such specific information could not have been a coincidence. Furthermore, evidence was collected that revealed a long-term pattern of control by the accused over Gabriella, including indications of psychological manipulation and jealousy. A key piece of evidence was finding Neuster's DNA under Gabriella's fingernails, which clearly showed there had been a physical struggle. Several witnesses testified in court. Gabriella's friends spoke about the emotional distress she experienced in the months before she disappeared, describing how Neuster tried to control her, limited her social interactions, and put her under significant emotional pressure. During the proceedings, a message was read aloud in which Neuster made threats. The content had a significant impact on the jury, prompting the defense to adjust its strategy. They described Neuster as someone who was emotionally unstable and acted impulsively due to extreme stress. They stated that his relationship with Gabriella was mutual but unofficial, and that what happened was not premeditated. These claims angered Gabriella's family. Her stepfather, in particular, spoke out after several hearings, saying that attempts to defend the accused were disrespectful to Gabriella's memory. During the trial, Gabriella's mother, Liliana, remained composed and attended every session. The family was clear and united in saying that this was not a domestic dispute. It was a betrayal that ended a life already controlled and suppressed. Their lawyers argued that this was not only a breach of trust, but Neuster's position as a family member made it even worse. The prosecution requested the harshest penalty, life in prison, because of the seriousness of the crime. They pointed to the close family relationship between those involved, the long-term psychological manipulation, and the deliberate effort to conceal the body. Once both sides gave their closing arguments, the jury was sent out to deliberate and make their decision. Tension filled the courtroom. Gabriella's family sat quietly, anxiously awaiting the verdict. When the jury returned, the foreperson announced the decision: guilty of first-degree murder, with aggravating factors due to the family relationship and gender-based violence. The judge delivered the sentence without delay. Neuster Quintana was sentenced to life imprisonment. The court dismissed the defense's argument that the confession was coerced, noting that it contained detailed information and was supported by physical evidence. The fact that there had also been long-term psychological control made the charges even more serious. Neuster remained expressionless as the verdict was announced. His lawyers sat in silence, staring at the floor. Across the courtroom, Gabriella's mother began to cry, and her husband held her in his arms. This was not a victory, but a painful farewell. Justice had been served, yet their daughter was lost forever. In July 2009, 55-year-old Gloria Huerta Marmolejo vanished without a trace from her home in El Paso, Texas. The day before her disappearance, she had unexpectedly returned from a trip and discovered something in her house that she had likely suspected for a long time. Just hours later, all contact with her was lost. No calls, no messages, no clues. When her son suggested that she might have just gone away for a while, the rest of the family grew concerned. Gloria was not the type to leave without telling anyone. A few days later, her car was found abandoned, and her belongings had been neatly left at home. What started as a typical missing person case soon revealed a chilling truth about long-hidden relationships, a double life, and a betrayal that turned deadly. El Paso is located in the far western part of Texas, right on the border with Mexico. It's known for its mix of cultures, its tense border atmosphere, and its higher crime rates. Despite its rough reputation, generations of families have built their lives there, holding tightly to traditions, loyalty, and the Sunday gatherings that bring everyone together. It was here, on July 28, 1955, that Gloria Marmolejo was born. She grew up in a large, close-knit family of Mexican heritage, where support, family ties, and deep loyalty were passed down through the years. In the early 1970s, Gloria met Armando Marmolejo. He won her over quickly, and by October 11, 1975, they were married. Gloria poured her heart into the relationship, never allowing anyone to speak poorly about her husband and always ready to stand by his side. They had 2 sons, Manny first, then David a few years later. At first, their family life seemed like a model of stability, a house, sons, holidays, and day-to-day life together. However, after David was born, Armando took a job that supposedly required constant travel. He was home less and less until he seemed to disappear entirely. No one really knew what he was doing or where he was going. His business trips were shrouded in secrecy, even relatives were left in the dark. By the time David turned about 6, their father was rarely around. In April 1995, Gloria made the divorce official. Armando moved to a different state, cut off contact with Manny and David. Gloria didn't let this break her spirit. She accepted the situation and focused on raising her sons. According to her brother, she had a different relationship with each of them, tailored to their personalities and needs. As Manny and David grew older, they began to drift apart. Each took his own path and followed his own interests, which was a natural part of life. Manny settled into a steady routine, while David frequently changed his priorities and directions. Gloria, after years of pouring herself into family life, eventually refused to sink into loneliness. At 50, she made a big change. She left her job of 27 years, went back to school, and earned a degree in management. She became a real estate agent, a job that provided her not just with an income, but also with a sense of purpose. It offered her flexible hours and the chance to be in control of her own time. Life eventually settled into a comfortable routine. The house where Gloria lived was tidy, well kept, and surrounded by a garden she loved to care for. She spent her time reading, enjoying the fresh air, and seemed to have found the peace she had always longed for. But everything changed suddenly. One of Gloria's neighbors, an elderly man she had known for years, became seriously ill. His adult son came to take care of him. After the son's arrival, Gloria began noticing some odd things happening. She often saw someone watching her from behind the bushes that bordered their yards. The man would hide, never getting too close, but his stare felt invasive and unsettling. Once, she even saw him holding what looked like a phone or camera, clearly recording her. This wasn't a one-time incident, it happened repeatedly. The sense of safety Gloria had always felt in her home was gone. She tried not to panic, but the tension kept building. Despite everything, she never went to the police. Part of her held back out of compassion for her sick neighbor. She worried that involving the authorities might make things worse. Another part of her felt it was better to wait, to observe, and to avoid making any sudden moves. Rather than contacting the police, she decided to call her brother Mark. She explained the situation clearly and shared her anxiety about it. She asked him to stay connected in case things got worse. While she didn't want to create unnecessary drama, she thought it was important for him to be informed. After that call, the thought of moving began to occupy her mind more frequently. Her sons moved out a long time ago. Manny is now living in Phoenix, and David has also moved to a new location. Although life in El Paso had always seemed stable and familiar, it was starting to feel uncertain. However, moving would mean leaving the home where she had rebuilt her life after her divorce, raised her sons, and rediscovered herself. It was not just a house, it was a part of her story. Leaving felt like relinquishing her past, whereas staying meant enduring ongoing anxiety. Over time, her thoughts of moving evolved into a quiet certainty, signaling that significant changes were approaching. To truly understand what happened, we need to look back at David, Gloria's younger son, during his early childhood. From a young age, David stood out from his classmates, not because he was academically inclined or well-behaved, but because he had a talent for getting into trouble. He found school uninteresting, disliked doing chores, and resisted any attempts to guide him. Unlike his brother Manny, who loved sports and eagerly embraced learning, David chose a different path. He was carefree, ignored school rules, and was always preoccupied with girls. David was restless, never committed to any activity for long. His interests were superficial and constantly changing. It was evident that his main priorities were his appearance, popularity, and the attention he received from girls. Relatives noted that even in his teenage years, he enjoyed being the focus of everyone's attention. He knew how to leverage his good looks, confidence, and charm. While his classmates were still learning about dating, David behaved as if he had everything under control. He felt entitled to attention, viewed girls as just another aspect of his life. This sense of entitlement and inflated self-esteem became defining characteristics of his identity. At the age of 16, he began dating a girl, who became his official girlfriend. However, he still spent time with other girls. To his family and friends, he presented his girlfriend as his serious partner, while secretly, he was seeing other people. She was 2 years younger than him and became pregnant at just 15. This unexpected situation changed everything. Suddenly, David felt he needed to take responsibility. He dropped out of school, found a job, and proposed to her. His decision surprised everyone, even Gloria. Despite her initial shock, Gloria supported David through this difficult time. She accepted his girlfriend as part of the family and quickly offered help with the new baby. After the birth of their first son, they welcomed 3 more children. Gloria played a vital role, helping to raise her grandchildren, managing the household, and providing financial support. The young family lived with her, and once again, Gloria became the center of the home. It felt like she was experiencing motherhood all over again. This time as a grandmother, she dedicated herself to the role with the same passion. Despite his family's encouragement, David struggled to find stability in his life. He changed jobs frequently, never staying in one place for long and showing little desire to advance in any career. At one point, he received a job offer from a construction company in Phoenix, Arizona. This opportunity seemed appealing, as it offered better pay and a chance to reunite with his older brother, Manny, who was already living there. Additionally, their father, Armando, had contacted him after years of no communication, and he, too, was living in Phoenix. The decision to move happened quickly. His partner and the kids joined him. For David, this was a chance to start over, improve his finances, strengthen his relationship with Manny, and possibly reconnect with Armando, something he never thought would be possible. Once in Arizona, David was surrounded by family again, despite the changes. Armando was now living with a partner and raising 2 younger kids, Jonathan and Mariah. Mariah looked up to her older brothers, especially David. To her, he seemed mature, confident, and like a hero she admired. She spent a lot of time at their house, playing with her nephews and helping out. His partner, busy taking care of 4 kids, appreciated the extra help. The family bonds appeared to be getting stronger. During this time, hidden issues were starting to surface beneath the appearance of normal life. Mariah was becoming more involved in David's daily routine, and no one realized how harmful that relationship could be. Mariah, David's younger half-sister, quickly became a constant presence in his life. However, as Mariah matured, David's partner began to notice unsettling changes in David's behavior around Mariah. While everything appeared fine on the surface, she felt that something wasn't right. Their interactions, the way they spoke to each other, the small gestures, their closeness, seemed excessive. Although it could be dismissed as family affection, she couldn't shake her growing unease. She hesitated to make any assumptions, thinking that maybe her concerns were just a result of her own stress and exhaustion. When David got a job offer in Hawaii, he moved there by himself. When Mariah was around 15 or 16, David invited her to spend the summer in Hawaii. At first, everyone thought it was a normal family trip with her brother, his partner, and their children. However, after a few weeks, David's partner began to notice unsettling signs. She saw the way David and Mariah looked at each other and spoke. These little things didn't feel right. What started as a vague concern gradually turned into real suspicion. One day, she walked in on them in the bedroom. Disturbed by what she witnessed, she immediately called Gloria. For Gloria, this news was shocking and heartbreaking. The idea that something inappropriate might be happening between her son and his young half-sister was unbearable. She demanded that it must end immediately, and Mariah was sent back home to Texas right away. The incident did not become public and had no formal repercussions, but it changed the dynamics within the family. Gloria lost trust in her son. Although she tried to act normally, she recognized that this was not just a simple mistake, it felt like a significant threat. The bond of trust was broken. The once strong family ties began to deteriorate quickly. A serious argument erupted between mother and son. Gloria expressed her disapproval openly, criticized David's actions, demanded he cut off all contact with Mariah, and made it clear she wouldn't accept anything like this again. David denied everything, claiming there was no relationship and accusing others of blowing things out of proportion. However, Gloria did not believe him. Her life experiences, cautious nature, and that unique maternal instinct told her that this situation was much more serious than David was willing to acknowledge. After Mariah returned to Texas, the family faced another crisis. David was involved in a serious motorcycle accident on one of Hawaii's winding roads. He lost control of his bike and unfortunately had to have one of his legs amputated. When Gloria found out, she rushed to Hawaii, putting aside any previous disagreements. In that moment, all conflicts were forgotten. Her son needed her, and she responded like any caring mother would. During David's recovery, Gloria stayed with him in the hospital, helping him adapt to his new physical limitations and providing unwavering support. David shared with others that his mother never left his side, always holding his hand, encouraging him, and doing everything possible to help him feel complete despite his loss. After a long rehabilitation, Gloria suggested that David come back to El Paso with her. David agreed, as his relationship with his partner was over and he had little contact with his sons. Returning to his mother appeared to be his only choice. However, Gloria had one strict condition: he must have no contact with Mariah. If he complied, she promised to keep everything that had happened a secret and allow him a chance to start anew. David accepted the condition, and they went back to Texas. Gloria resumed her daily routines, helping her son adjust to his new life, while staying watchful. On the surface, things seemed stable. David appeared calm, contributing around the house and not causing any concerns. After enduring so much chaos, Gloria finally felt like she was regaining control. The neighbor who had been watching her from the bushes still lived next door, which made her uncomfortable. However, now that David was back home, she felt more secure. Even with the tension between them, just having a man around made her feel less exposed. It seemed like the worst was behind her, but her worries lingered. Deep down, she sensed that the situation with Mariah might not be resolved. While everything appeared calm on the outside, Gloria couldn't shake the feeling that a threat was still present. She remained vigilant, scrutinizing every encounter and doubting whether her son had genuinely changed. When David's condition improved and he could care for himself, Gloria decided to take a short trip. Her older son, Manny, had been inviting her to visit him in Phoenix for a long time, and now that her younger son seemed stable, she agreed to go. Before leaving, she asked David to look after the house. At first glance, everything appeared to be fine. He stayed in El Paso, maintained the house, and seemed to follow her instructions. However, while she was in Arizona, Gloria's unease grew. The doubts she had tried to ignore became more persistent. She confided in her brother Mark and asked him to check on David to make sure everything was all right and that Mariah wasn't visiting him. Mark promised to check in, but based on her feelings, Gloria suspected he hadn't actually done much to follow through. Gloria's worries continued to grow until she made the sudden decision to return home unexpectedly. When she arrived, she was shocked by what she found. The house, which had always been clean and organized, was now a total mess, with dirt and clutter everywhere. The most alarming discovery was the locked door to her bedroom, which had a new lock she had never seen before. Anxiously, Gloria called David to ask what was happening. He responded that he was at the movies and would return soon. She waited for him. When David finally came home, they got into a heated argument. Gloria accused him of being disrespectful, breaking his promises, and allowing the house to fall into disarray. David tried to defend himself, saying he would help her pack for a trip back to Phoenix and that he had gone back to the movies afterward. Later that evening, on July 25th, Manny began to feel anxious. He hadn't heard from his mother since she left his house that morning. Despite calling and texting her, he received no replies. He then tried to contact David. Initially, David didn't answer, but as midnight approached, he finally returned Manny's call. David informed Manny that Gloria had come by, they had an argument, and he helped her pack. She likely returned to Phoenix. However, as the night turned into morning, Gloria still hadn't appeared at Manny's place or reached out to any family members. Her phone was off, and there were no messages from her. By the next day, July 26th, it was clear that something was seriously wrong. Manny called David again, but David seemed distant and unhelpful, repeatedly claiming he didn't know anything. His lack of concern was unsettling, making Manny even more convinced that something was amiss. By July 27th, Gloria had been missing for 2 days. Manny contacted everyone he could think of, family, friends, and neighbors, but no one had seen her. It felt like she had disappeared completely. Eventually, he decided to call the police, but they told him that the missing person report needed to come from the last person who saw her, which was David. Soon after, other family members, including Gloria's mother and her brother Conrad, arrived at the house. David greeted them at the door, appearing calm and somewhat indifferent. After much convincing, he finally agreed to go to the police and file a report about Gloria's disappearance. On July 28th, Manny and his wife arrived in El Paso to find something was wrong. As soon as Manny entered the house, he noticed that Gloria's suitcase was in the corner, untouched, and her makeup bag had not been opened. It became clear that she hadn't gone anywhere. She had vanished unexpectedly, without packing or informing anyone. David's explanation about helping her pack didn't make sense since her belongings were still there. Additionally, his behavior was unsettling. He seemed calm and detached, not asking questions or showing any signs of concern. Manny pressed David for details about the last time he saw their mother. David showed Manny some text messages from Gloria, in which she asked him to unlock the door for her. Then, unexpectedly, he added a new part to his story. He claimed that after leaving the house, he went to a party at a woman's house, and later that night, went to a club with another woman. He said he didn't return home until around 3 a.m. During their conversation about their mother, David made a comment that raised alarm. He said he worried they might find traces of his DNA on her. After all, he hugged and kissed her. This statement was confusing, especially since Gloria was reported missing, and no one had suggested anything more serious. The following day, July 29th, local detectives brought in the family members for questioning. David repeated his story, but this time he altered some details. He no longer mentioned going to the movies. Instead, he said he spent the whole evening at the party. A woman confirmed his presence, stating he arrived between 7 and 8 p.m., stayed until midnight, and seemed tense. She did not mention anything about him going to a club with another woman. On that same day, troubling news emerged. Gloria's car was discovered abandoned near an elementary school in El Paso. Her personal items, purse, keys, and phone, were still inside, but there was no sign of Gloria. This changed the investigation from a missing person case to a potential crime, and the Violent Crimes Unit took over. Officers began canvassing the neighborhood. Several residents reported seeing Gloria's car leave the garage on the morning of July 26th. One witness was confident that she had seen Gloria driving. However, another neighbor had a different account. He stated that he saw a young, light-skinned woman with short blonde hair behind the wheel, and he noticed what appeared to be a man's silhouette in the back seat. This was the first solid evidence suggesting that someone other than Gloria had driven her car after she disappeared. The police searched the house and found bloodstains in the garage, mostly on the door of a built-in cabinet. Although there wasn't a large amount, it appeared fresh, leading them to classify the house as a potential crime scene. This discovery prompted detectives to question David more intensively. His accounts were inconsistent, with discrepancies even in basic facts. He struggled with the timeline, frequently changed the order of events, and introduced new details each time he spoke. Throughout the questioning, he remained unusually calm, showing no concern or asking questions about the investigation, which raised suspicions. The police analyzed the blood samples and began collecting DNA from family members. Manny noticed his brother's strange behavior and couldn't stop thinking about Mariah. He felt uneasy about the close relationship between her and David, leading him to urge the police to consider Mariah as a possible suspect, especially given David's partner's previous comments. Investigators examined cell phone data, which revealed important findings. Records show that David made a call between 1:30 and 1:40 a.m. on the night of July 25th to 26th. His phone was located almost 4 miles away from where Gloria's car was found. Additionally, there were several calls between David's and Mariah's phones from 5:30 to 6 a.m., both incoming and outgoing. These inconsistencies, combined with witness statements, changing stories, and digital evidence, suggested that Gloria's disappearance was not an accident and that she did not leave on her own. The investigation had clearly turned into a criminal case, with David and Mariah being the last known individuals to have seen Gloria alive. On July 31st, a woman walking her dog found Gloria's body in the desert in Santa Teresa, New Mexico. The body had started to decompose. Her head was covered with 2 layers, first with plastic and then with a paper bag. Her left leg and arms were also wrapped in plastic. Investigators quickly realized that whoever committed this crime attempted to conceal any biological evidence, suggesting a deliberate act rather than a spontaneous one. The medical examiner determined that Gloria died from suffocation. Her broken larynx indicated that significant physical force was used, showing that the perpetrator had complete control over the situation. This was not a reckless act, it was a calculated and brutal attack. Lab results started to arrive, revealing that the blood samples found in Gloria's garage belonged to Mariah. This discovery made Mariah a key figure in the investigation. Gloria's brother, Mark, informed detectives that before Gloria vanished, she had confided in him her suspicions about David and Mariah having an inappropriate relationship, which she strongly disapproved of. Mariah and David were questioned about their whereabouts on the night of July 25th to 26th. They stated they had spent the entire night together, but cell phone records contradicted this. David's phone made a call at 1:37 a.m., which was almost 4 miles away from where Gloria's body was found later. Additionally, there were calls between David and Mariah at 5:30 and 6 a.m. If they were together the whole night, why did they call each other? Under pressure from investigators, Mariah started to change her story. Eventually, she was offered a deal. She would receive full immunity if she provided the complete truth about what happened. She accepted the offer. Mariah explained that Gloria unexpectedly returned home and discovered her there. This led to a heated argument between Gloria and her son. Gloria insisted that Mariah leave at once and never return. At that moment, Mariah claimed that David lost his temper and became violent, resulting in Gloria's tragic death. Following this, David contacted Mariah to ask for her assistance in covering up the incident. They cleaned the scene to eliminate any evidence and placed Gloria's body in her car, then drove it out of the city. Mariah also confessed that the blood found in a garage belonged to her, as it was from a prior altercation with David. When David buried Gloria, Mariah stated that she was present nearby. Her confession was a crucial turning point in the investigation. On September 4, 2009, David was arrested and faced charges of causing serious harm, hiding evidence, and destroying evidence. The trial began in May 4, 2010. Mariah, who had been given immunity, testified against him. She revealed that their relationship began when she was 14 and he was 29. A startling detail was that she had a child with David, who was later put up for adoption. This information surprised even those who were aware of their relationship. Many family members were unaware of the complete story. Some remained silent while others never suspected anything wrong. Investigators provided more evidence, but no DNA from David was found on Gloria's body. The defense claimed that the case relied on circumstantial evidence. David remained calm and composed in court, occasionally becoming emotional, but consistently insisted on his innocence. The first trial ended without a clear verdict because the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision. To prevent local bias, it was decided to move the trial to San Antonio. July 10, 2010, David Marmolejo was charged with murdering his mother. In 2011, resulting in David being found guilty and sentenced to 54 years in prison. However, the situation continued to evolve. David was extradited to Arizona in December 2016 to face the crimes he committed against escort service. He is awaiting retrial at the Maricopa County Jail, where he has been held since December 8, 2016. David Marmolejo now faces 29 charges, including 15 counts of abuse assault, 4 counts of armed robbery with a deadly weapon, 4 counts of aggravated assault, 2 counts of abuse, and 4 counts of kidnapping. He initially denied the charges, but his story began to change when a Phoenix detective presented him with evidence. Marmolejo has denied the abuse assault but admitted to picking up approximately 11 escort services during his time in Phoenix. After his arrest in 2006, Marmolejo was reportedly charged with 4 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of armed robbery, and 10 counts of abuse assault. However, the case was dismissed because 3 of the women could not be found, and the 4th refused to cooperate. Enjoying her freedom, she went to live with her mother. To avoid a life sentence, he made a plea deal with prosecutors, admitting guilt to 6 of the charges while the others were dismissed. Gloria dedicated her life to raising her sons and did everything she could to pull David back from the edge. In the end, he was the one who destroyed everything she had worked so hard to build. The tragic loss of Gloria Huerta Marmolejo revealed the devastating consequences of betrayal within a family she fought to protect. Her unwavering dedication to her sons, especially David, could not shield her from his descent into violence. Convicted of her murder and facing further charges in Arizona, David's actions shattered the bonds Gloria cherished. Her story serves as a haunting reminder that even the strongest love cannot always mend a broken soul, leaving behind a legacy of grief and a call for vigilance against hidden dangers in those closest to us. On a lonely road in Morelos, a young woman's body was found. Bystanders quickly called for emergency help. She was lying still, her skin had noticeable bruises. There were no ID or personal belongings nearby to identify her. Ariadna Lopez was born on July 5, 1995, in a challenging neighborhood in Mexico City. Despite having limited resources, she grew up in a loving environment. Her mother raised her and her older brother, Omar Rodriguez. Their father was mostly absent and had little interest in being involved in their lives. In his absence, Omar took on the role of a protector and role model for Ariadna, creating a strong bond that gave her a sense of security knowing she was supported. Ariadna had a warm and friendly personality, which made her well liked by her friends. She easily connected with others and was known for her honesty, helpfulness. During her school years, she formed close friendships, shared dreams about the future. However, her adulthood was marked by tragedy. In 2018, when Ariadna was only 23, her mother was diagnosed with cancer. The illness progressed quickly, and the family soon faced the heart-wrenching loss. The death of her mother affected both Ariadna and Omar deeply. This experience strengthened their relationship, forced Ariadna to grow up quickly, taking charge of her own life. Before her mother's illness, Ariadna started dating a young man, and their relationship progressed quickly. Soon, she discovered she was pregnant. The birth of their son was a significant turning point, but it did not bring long-term stability to their relationship. They realized early that they were not compatible as a couple and decided to part ways. However, they continued to work together to co-parent their son. As a new mother, Ariadna faced various challenges. She had to juggle parenting with the need to find a stable job. Her journey toward financial independence began when she secured a job at a popular bar in Mexico City that catered to affluent clients. This role came with high expectations regarding professionalism and social skills. At the bar, Ariadna learned to interact effectively with diverse people. Despite the stress of the job, she met its challenges by using her charm and strong work ethic. When the global issue struck, Ariadna's life changed dramatically. The bar where she worked closed, and she lost her job. Instead of feeling defeated, Ariadna viewed this as an opportunity to pursue a long-held dream, opening her own beauty salon. This new venture represented her determination to shape her own life. With her experience and a strong network of contacts, she successfully established a business that provided financial security for herself and her son. During this time, Ariadna began a new relationship with a man she felt a strong connection with. This relationship brought her happiness and a sense of stability. She balanced her responsibilities between her son, her business, and her new partner. Although her days were busy, she welcomed each moment with appreciation, eager for the new opportunities that came her way. By the age of 27, Ariadna's life was like a carefully arranged puzzle. Every success and challenge added to the overall picture of her journey. She had faced loss, rebuilt her life from scratch, focused on her son's future, and achieved her independence. However, just as this chapter of her life seemed to be starting on a positive note, it was unfortunately a precursor to something much more troubling. Ariadna met Vanessa Flores through mutual friends at a social event where Ariadna was with her friends. Vanessa made a strong impression. She was young, energetic, and charismatic, easily attracting attention with everyone around her. However, those close to Vanessa often noted that she could be unpredictable. Behind her charm, there were some more difficult aspects to her personality, and her actions sometimes surprised others. Rodel Astudillo Garcia, a middle-aged entrepreneur, often appeared in Vanessa's social group. His name was frequently associated with rumors due to his wealth, influence, and extravagant lifestyle. He was often seen with younger women who wanted to join his circle. There were many whispers about him, including tales of high-profile connections and even suggestions of links to organized groups. However, no one in his social circle could confirm any of these claims. Rodel himself steered clear of direct questions regarding his past or business dealings. His presence garnered both respect and a sense of unease. Ariadna was smart and independent, but she didn't realize how different her new friends were from her usual social circle. Vanessa, eager to impress, often boasted about her connections to influential people, particularly Rattel, whom she claimed could solve problems effortlessly. Gradually, Ariadna began spending more time with this group. Vanessa seemed genuinely intrigued by Ariadna, lavishing attention on her and diligently trying to earn her trust. When Rodel learned about Ariadna from Vanessa, he quickly wanted to meet her. During their first encounter, he surprised her with his attentiveness and charm. His confidence attracted people, including Ariadna. However, behind his polished facade lay a more complicated character. Those who had interacted with him mentioned his manipulative nature. Despite this, Ariadna perceived him as respectful and even kind. Vanessa played an important role in building the connection. She often invited Ariadna to events where Rodel was also present, fostering a welcoming atmosphere. However, as time went on, small warning signs began to emerge. Ariadna's close friends started advising her to be wary of this group. Some knew about Rattel's dubious reputation and Vanessa's unpredictable behavior. They were concerned that this new social circle might carry hidden dangers. Ariadna dismissed her friends' concerns about her new social circle, viewing her friendship with Vanessa as a refreshing escape from everyday stress. It offered her a chance to experience new things. Meanwhile, Rodel tried to win her over by being generous and friendly, inviting her to dinners and parties that felt fun. Even though Ariadna was in a relationship, she continued to keep her friendships and go to social events. Those who knew her said her partner trusted her and had no issues with her socializing. As time went on, Ariadna noticed some changes in her relationships. Vanessa began to call her more often, suggesting outings and making plans that focused on spending time together. At the same time, Rodel was gradually trying to become a more significant part of her life, presenting himself as someone who could always provide help or support. Unknowingly, Ariadna was getting deeper into their dynamic. On October 30th, 2022, Ariadna accepted Vanessa's invitation to spend the evening with friends. They planned to start at a popular restaurant in downtown Mexico City. Vanessa assured her it would be a relaxed evening filled with good food and enjoyable conversation. Rodel was also expected to join them, which made Ariadna feel slightly uncomfortable. Although she had her reservations about him, she didn't want to disappoint Vanessa, so she decided to go. The group met in the evening at Fisher's, a seafood restaurant, the venue known for its upscale atmosphere and stylish decor, which was lively. At their table, the mood was relaxed. Wine and cocktails were being enjoyed, platters of appetizers added to the festive feel of the night. Rodel took the spotlight, sharing stories, proposing toasts, and engaging playfully with the wait staff. He exuded confidence and made sure everyone noticed him. Vanessa joined in, lightening the mood with jokes and laughter. The rest of the group attempted to keep the upbeat vibe, but Ariadna stood out because she seemed uncomfortable. She frequently checked her phone, responding to messages and looking concerned as she read the screen. She often glanced at Rodel, as if trying to understand unspoken feelings behind his words. Vanessa tried to draw her back into the fun, urging her to relax and have another drink, but Ariadna remained reserved, her demeanor suggesting that something was troubling her more than the lively atmosphere could hide. In the evening, Ariadna shared a puzzling message on her social media: "Would you miss me if I disappeared?" This caused concern among her followers. Some thought it was just a joke, but her close friends and colleagues felt it was out of character for her. The message created an unsettling feeling that, at the time, no one understood would be connected to her last hours. As the night went on, the group decided to continue their evening at Rodel's house, a suggestion made by Rodel himself. Vanessa supported the idea, claiming it would be a more relaxed and private setting. Although Ariadna felt uncertain, she eventually agreed after her friends pressured her. The rest of the group followed along, and they all traveled together to Rodel's home in his vehicle. His house was situated in an upscale neighborhood that reflected his public persona. Inside, the decor was sleek and modern, featuring luxurious elements. Upon arrival, the group settled into a spacious living room where music played and drinks were served, allowing the night to unfold. However, Ariadna started to feel increasingly uneasy. She stepped away several times to check her phone, pretending to take calls, which made her seem distant and distracted. Vanessa noticed her behavior and began whispering to Rodel, which only added to the tension in the room. Near midnight, Ariadna expressed her desire to go home because she was tired. Vanessa encouraged her to stay a bit longer, just another half hour. Rodel said nothing, but his lingering gaze on Ariadna made her uneasy. As the night came to a close, the guests began to depart, and Ariadna was among the last to leave. After that evening, no one in the group would see her alive again. On October 31st, the night before the Day of the Dead, Ricardo Calderon and a friend set off on a bike ride south from Mexico City to Tepoztlán, a popular day trip destination. They turned off the road to rest outside the colonial town. That's where they made a grisly discovery: a woman's body in the bushes beneath an overpass, within earshot of passing traffic. She was lying on her back, with her arms spread out, her beige skirt pulled up above her waist, and her right foot clad in a white high-top sneaker. Her hair was braided, and she had no identification or belongings. They quickly contacted the police, who arrived several hours later. While waiting, they took photos of the scene to document details that might assist in identifying the woman. When the police arrived, they secured the area, started gathering evidence. They found visible tire tracks in the dirt and markings that indicated the body had been moved. Forensic specialists observed signs of a struggle, but they couldn't determine the exact cause of death right away. No weapons were discovered, and the body had no obvious injuries that could explain what happened. There were also no documents or personal items to identify her. Hours later, images of the scene began to spread on social media, causing widespread concern. Among those who saw the photos were friends and family of Ariadna. Her father and her brother, Omar, recognized familiar features, including her tattoos. The tattoo reads, Armida, the name of Ariadna's mother. Another is a sunflower, her signature symbol. They feared the worst, so they filed a missing person report and informed the authorities that the woman found might be Ariadna Lopez. Meanwhile, authorities in the state of Morelos began a separate investigation. However, the local police's initial actions faced significant criticism. They mishandled evidence collection, leaving many crucial details at the scene undocumented. This raised serious concerns about the professionalism and integrity of the involved law enforcement. When Ariadna's family came to identify the body, they faced their worst fears. Omar recognized his sister by a tattoo on her shoulder. The shock was overwhelming, especially upon seeing the state of her body, which bore bruises and trauma on her face and arms, indicating some form of violence. In contrast, the police's initial statements were vague and unconvincing. The family responded by calling for justice, demanding a transparent investigation. On the same day, they contacted friends who used social media to help raise awareness. The campaign quickly gained traction, attracting thousands of users. Despite increasing public pressure, the Morelos police continued to believe that the death could have been an accident. They indicated that a final conclusion could only be reached after the forensic report was finished. This position only fueled further suspicion, especially as rumors started to spread that influential individuals might be attempting to cover up the truth. Investigators first interviewed Rodel and Vanessa, the last known people to see Ariadna alive. Their statements provided the initial account of the situation. Rodel stated that after the party, Ariadna chose to leave his house and called a taxi. He described her as a little upset but not overly concerned. He said he walked her to the door, and she left alone. Vanessa supported his story, confirming that Ariadna took a taxi but did not mention her destination. However, inconsistencies in their account quickly surfaced. The main issue was the absence of any confirmed taxi records. Neither Rodel nor Vanessa could provide the contact information for a driver or any evidence to back up their claims. Later, investigators checked several taxi service logs in the area but found no record of Ariadna being picked up that night. Another concern was the inconsistency in Vanessa's story. Her answers changed depending on the questions asked. At first, she claimed that Ariadna left the party on her own. Later, she mentioned that they had an argument, implying that Ariadna might have been emotionally troubled. Ariadna's friends reported to the police that Vanessa contacted them after Ariadna's disappearance, trying to suggest that Ariadna was in a bad state of mind, referring to her vague social media post. This post, made just hours before Ariadna's disappearance, raised concerns for many. While her family and close friends initially viewed it as a joke, investigators began to think it might signal her emotional distress on the night of the party. Additionally, Vanessa's increasingly anxious behavior was alarming. In messages to Ariadna's friends, she appeared hesitant to discuss the events of that night. At one point, she expressed fear of being suspected, though she didn't explain why. These clues led investigators to believe that Vanessa might be hiding important information. The initial investigation into Ariadna's death did not provide a clear explanation of what happened. However, further inquiries by law enforcement and independent experts revealed important evidence. 2 autopsies, surveillance footage, and text messages from the suspects' phones became crucial in piecing together the events. Oriel Carmona, the state's chief prosecutor, told reporters that an autopsy determined Ariadna Lopez died of severe alcohol poisoning. He stated that investigators found no signs of violence. Sitting at the same table, Yasmin Herrera Soto, the chief medical examiner, clarified the findings. The autopsy showed significant bruising but no fatal injuries. According to the autopsy report, none of the 17 fresh wounds on Ariadna's arms, legs, and torso broke the skin or caused external bleeding, and there were no broken bones or signs of assault. In an interview, Pereira noted that there were a pair of bruises on the back of Ariadna's head that caused internal bleeding in her skull, but no brain damage, and that the bruising was consistent with a fall. The cuts on Lopez's forehead were believed to have been caused by insects attacking her while her body was outside. Prosecutors stated that lab tests showed Ariadna's blood alcohol level was 0.498, a level that is 6 times the legal limit for driving in the United States. According to Carmona, Ariadna choked on her own vomit. Nevertheless, her family strongly disputed this finding. Ariadna's family, unsatisfied with the official explanation, requested an independent second autopsy. Under pressure from the public and her relatives, Ariadna's body was sent to a forensic institute in Mexico City. The results of this second examination contradicted the original conclusions. Experts discovered multiple injuries, including head trauma, bruises, and signs of struggle on her arms and legs, suggesting she may have tried to defend herself. These findings indicated that Ariadna's death was not accidental or solely due to alcohol. Consequently, her death was reclassified as the result of violent actions, leading authorities to treat the case as a criminal matter. Security footage from Rodel's apartment building provided crucial evidence in the case. One video shows Rodel early the morning after the party. A bald, bearded man dragged Ariadna Lopez's body, his legs stiff from rigor mortis, through the hallway and down to the garage. He carried the corpse over his right shoulder to the back of a black SUV, then hurried to the driver's seat. Mexico City Mayor Claudia Sheinbaum identified the man as Rodel Astudillo and accused him of driving the body and dumping it near Tepoztlán, a charge prosecutors later said was substantiated based on analysis of his cell phone records. Sheinbaum said Astudillo likely chose to dump the body in neighboring Morelos state because of his relationship with Carmona, the prosecutor she accused of covering up the case. Sheinbaum said that they had tried to blame the victim. He added that never again should a woman's murder be covered up and a woman be defamed and harmed. Meanwhile, Vanessa often told Ariadna's friends that she might have been having emotional difficulties and suggested she could have intentionally disappeared. However, her friends described Ariadna as lively and optimistic, with no known emotional issues. When the second autopsy and surveillance footage, it became evident that the initial theories of an accidental death or voluntary departure from Rodel's home were not valid. The evidence instead indicated a violent act and a conscious attempt to conceal the body. These findings led to legal actions against Rodel and Vanessa, who would soon face charges in court. Vanessa was the first to be arrested. Authorities discovered that she had been in regular contact with Rodel after Ariadna's death, discussing ways to evade legal consequences. Her arrest occurred amid significant media attention. During initial questioning, Vanessa claimed she was not involved in Ariadna's death, but her statements contained numerous contradictions. She asserted that she had gone to bed early on the night of the incident and knew nothing about what happened afterward. However, further investigations disproved this claim. Message logs indicated that she was aware of the situation and had conversed with Rodel about important details. Investigators also found that Vanessa had taken actions to destroy potential evidence, including deleting photos and conversations, trying to distance herself from the aftermath. Realizing the overwhelming evidence against him, Rodel chose to turn himself in. He arrived at the police station with his legal team and claimed he was innocent. He stated that he did not harm Ariadna. Instead, he panicked after finding her unresponsive in his home the morning after the party and attempted to conceal her body, fearing he would be blamed. However, investigators found significant issues with his version of events. First, a second autopsy revealed clear signs of physical trauma, contradicting his assertion that she died without any interference. Second, surveillance footage showed him intentionally carrying her body in a way that suggested he was trying to avoid being seen, which is not typical behavior for someone seeking help. Furthermore, his text messages with Vanessa indicated that they had coordinated their stories and worked to mislead others about what actually happened. During the investigation, alarming new evidence came to light pointing to possible corruption. There were increasing suspicions about a link between Rodel and a prosecutor in Morelos. Notably, the initial autopsy report from that state failed to mention any injuries that suggested violence. Public activists and Ariadna's family accused the prosecutor of abusing their position to protect Rodel, leading to widespread public anger. In response, authorities in Mexico City began a formal review of the prosecutor's actions, while Internal Affairs launched an independent investigation into potential misconduct. Some witnesses alleged that Rodel had ties to criminal groups, which could explain his seeming assurance that he would escape punishment. Nevertheless, both Vanessa and Rodel denied any direct involvement, instead choosing to defend each other, deflect questions. This evasiveness heightened investigators' suspicions and played a significant role in the decision to keep them in temporary custody. The reasons and events of that night prompted a thorough investigation. To find the truth, investigators had to piece together the timeline, analyze physical evidence, and study the actions of everyone at the gathering. Gradually, a clearer understanding started to take shape. Ariadna Lopez arrived at Fisher's, a bustling seafood restaurant in Mexico City, at around 6 p.m. on October 30th, wearing a long beige dress and white high-top sneakers. She hugged both Vanessa and Roddle. The trio, along with 3 others, left the restaurant about an hour later in Roddle's black SUV. All 6 arrived at Roddle's building at around 7:15 p.m. They took the elevator to his apartment. At first glance, everything seemed typical. There was laughter, conversation, and music, but subtle hints indicated something was off. Witnesses and text message analysis showed that Ariadna was unusually quiet and distracted. She often checked her phone, sending messages and answering calls, behavior her friends noted was unlike her during social events. This detail became important in the investigation. Ariadna's messages to a friend revealed her worries about the gathering and discomfort with certain people there. Although Vanessa and Rotel were the hosts, there was noticeable tension between them. Witnesses later noted that Vanessa directed several sharp comments at Ariadna throughout the night. Ariadna, wishing to avoid drama, responded calmly and tried to defuse any potential conflict. As the night progressed and alcohol began to affect everyone, tensions intensified. Vanessa, already emotional, raised her voice multiple times, accusing Ariadna of being disrespectful and unfriendly. No one else at the gathering agreed with these accusations, but the atmosphere became increasingly tense. While Roddle tried to stay neutral, it was evident that he felt uncomfortable with Vanessa's actions. The turning point occurred the next morning. Witnesses reported seeing Ariadna heading toward the exit, apparently trying to leave the house, but for unknown reasons, she returned shortly after. It is thought that Vanessa confronted her again at that time, escalating their argument. Investigators believe jealousy was at the heart of their conflict, as Vanessa accused Ariadna of attracting too much attention from Roddle. Messages found on phones showed that Vanessa and Roddle later discussed the tense moments from that night. Within about half an hour, 3 of the 6 had left, leaving only Roddle, Vanessa, and Ariadna inside. The case file indicates that Vanessa, influenced by alcohol, became increasingly aggressive. At some point, investigators think an altercation took place, resulting in the fatal injuries Ariadna sustained. Why did Ariadna share such an unusual message on social media that night? Initially, many assumed it was a joke, but her close friends later confirmed that she was likely feeling uneasy because of Vanessa's behavior and the tense vibe at the gathering. The post might have been her way of expressing her discomfort or reaching out for help. As pieced together the events, it became clear that Vanessa's jealousy, heightened by alcohol and her emotional instability, significantly contributed to what transpired. Instead of seeking assistance, Roddle appeared to prioritize hiding what happened, which ultimately made the situation worse. Ariadna's family has worked hard to reveal the full truth about her death. They organized protests, created social media campaigns, and made sure the public remained focused on the case. One major success was attracting international media attention, which increased pressure on Mexico's judicial system to be transparent. In late November, hundreds of people participated in a protest march in Mexico City. The preliminary court proceedings in Ariadna's case were a key moment in their quest for justice. Despite facing some resistance from authorities, her family and their legal team ensured that the case was handled openly and fairly, with all details thoroughly examined. The public and the media closely followed every step of the investigation and court process, minimizing the chances for cover-ups or misinformation. The legal process centered on the actions of Roddle and Vanessa. During the hearings, prosecutors presented strong evidence, including surveillance videos, audio recordings, and text messages from their phones. This evidence suggested not only that they helped hide Ariadna's body, but also that they might have been involved in aggressive behavior leading up to her death. The defense claimed it was all a tragic accident, but the extensive witness testimonies and forensic findings raised significant doubts about that explanation. A key part of the trial was uncovering the motive behind the crime. Witnesses who knew Vanessa described her as emotionally unstable and prone to outbursts, especially when drinking. Rodel was depicted as having a questionable past with possible connections to criminal groups, which further complicated his role that night. Although both defendants denied any responsibility for Ariadna's death, their statements often conflicted with established facts, increasing suspicions against them. At this time, the final verdict has not yet been reached, and the investigation is still ongoing. However, prosecutors have charged the suspects with homicide, which may be categorized as femicide, a crime motivated by gender-based violence. In Mexico, this classification is seen as an aggravating circumstance and could result in a maximum penalty of up to 70 years in prison if both suspects are convicted. In January 2023, after reviewing conflicting autopsy results and other evidence, Mexico's Federal Attorney General's office sided with Mexico City prosecutors. The Attorney General stated that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, resulting from a blunt instrument or contact with a flat, hard surface. The coroner's conclusion that Ariadna's death was related to excessive drinking was deemed unacceptable by the Attorney General. Investigators determined that she died in Rodel's apartment on the evening of October 30th, between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m., but they did not provide details regarding a possible motive. Morelos prosecutor, Carmona, denied any wrongdoing. He described the work of his forensic detectives as impeccable and dismissed the Attorney General's findings as mere opinion. Mexico City authorities increased security for the Lopez family to mitigate fears of retaliation by Rodel's accomplices. Ariadna's 7-year-old son is now living with her older brother, Omar. As the closest male role model, he has assumed the responsibilities of both guardian and father. Omar is fully committed to meeting the child's needs while also honoring his sister's memory by providing the love and stability that Ariadna once offered. The rest of the family has rallied around him, determined to help the boy cope with his loss and ensure that he grows up in a nurturing environment. Ariadna Lopez became a symbol of the fight for equality as women marched in the streets on Women's Day with her image on signs. An accident is an event from which no one is immune. At any moment, something unexpected can occur that completely changes the usual course of events. However, not everyone is able to accept the death of a loved one, and sometimes an accident turns into a catalyst for even more bloodshed. On the evening of July 1, 2016, Roberta Smargiassi was heading to her mother's house. At that time, she was 33 years old. She had been handling her business all Friday and was planning to visit her relatives to share some good news. Roberta wanted to prepare a festive dinner to gather all her relatives later. She was excited and hurried to reach her parents' house as soon as possible, using her scooter. Before leaving, Roberta called her mother to say she would be arriving soon. Unfortunately, she was not destined to reach her loved ones. Roberta was riding her scooter along the road when she moved through the green light. In the other lane, a young man named Italo Delisa was driving a Fiat Punto. He was only 21 years old. Despite the fact that the traffic light was red for him, he ignored it and continued driving. He did not notice the scooter that Roberta was riding. A collision occurred. After the impact, she crashed into the traffic light and fell onto the asphalt. The impact was quite strong, and she was thrown onto the sidewalk. Roberta sustained very serious injuries. Italo was confused but did not run away from the scene. He tried to provide first aid to Roberta. Witnesses immediately called the emergency services. When the medics arrived, they found the victim lying on the sidewalk with her head badly injured. Wounded, Roberta was barely clinging to life. They attempted to help her on the scene, but without specialized equipment, she would definitely not have survived. Therefore, she was urgently loaded into an ambulance and sent to the hospital in Vasto, Italy. The medics fought for her life on the way to the medical center. Upon arrival, Roberta was immediately taken to the surgical room for emergency surgery. Unfortunately, they were unable to save her, as her injuries were too severe. The cause of death was a craniocerebral injury due to her head hitting the pavement. Italo was also taken to the medical center. It turned out that he only sustained minor abrasions. There was no one else in his car. After treating his abrasions, Italo underwent testing for alcohol and prohibited substances in his blood. He did not refuse the examination and claimed he had not used anything. Italo expressed regret over what had happened, explaining that he had been distracted, accidentally ignored a red traffic light, and had not noticed Roberta on her small scooter. A toxicological examination confirmed that he was telling the truth. No alcohol or illegal substances were found in his blood. He behaved appropriately, reasoned calmly, was aware of the situation, and expressed remorse for what had transpired. When he was informed that the victim of the accident did not survive the collision, he burst into tears. Italo did not attempt to deny his guilt but continued to assert that it was all the result of a coincidence. Naturally, this provided little consolation for Roberta's loved ones. Her mother had been expecting to welcome her daughter home, but Roberta never arrived. She tried to call her daughter, but was unable to reach her. Eventually, she turned to Roberta's husband, who informed her about the accident. When the family received the tragic news, everyone was in shock. They blamed her death on the young man who had been inattentive behind the wheel. But none of this could bring Roberta back. 9 months before the tragedy, Roberta Smargiassi married a man named Fabio Di Lello, who was the love of her life. At the time of the fatal accident, Fabio was also 34 years old. They had known each other for many years before deciding to tie the knot. Fabio was a sporty and quite popular man, a well-known footballer who demonstrated excellent results in amateur tournaments. In 2015, he debuted in Serie D as a reserve player, and the entire family, including Roberta, was very proud of him. When they first met, Roberta worked in her father-in-law's bakery, as he owned one of the most popular bakeries in the city. After meeting Fabio, they began to build their relationship. Everyone saw their sincere love and believed that their marriage would be the best example of genuine feelings. Therefore, the tragic death of Roberta was a real blow for both families. Once all the paperwork was completed, funeral preparations began on July 3, 2016. The body was taken to the church, which was overflowing with the victim's family and friends. There were so many people that they couldn't all fit inside the building. Most of them crowded outside, waiting to say goodbye to the victim of the tragedy. Roberta's funeral was conducted by the priest who had married them on October 3, 2015. At that moment, of course, no one suspected that 9 months later the woman would be back here, but this time to be buried. This accident turned Fabio's life upside down. It was obvious from the start that he was having a hard time coping with this loss. After saying goodbye to Roberta, the families did not want to accept that Roberta had been taken from them by chance, and now they were demanding retribution against her killer. The most embittered of all was Fabio. He insisted that Italo had not accidentally hit his wife, so he demanded a thorough investigation in the hope of obtaining the maximum possible punishment for him. As part of the investigation, the Carabinieri spoke to witnesses. However, no one noticed inadequate behavior or any recklessness on the road. The driver calmly maneuvered his car and did not disturb anyone. Some witnesses even claimed not to have seen Roberta, arguing that she was moving on a small scooter, which was difficult to spot. The police had footage from surveillance cameras located in 3 places at the intersection, so the moment of the accident was recorded from different angles. All the recordings were carefully analyzed. In addition, they collected footage of both participants in the accident driving before the collision. Both behaved calmly on the road and followed the rules and speed limits, at least until Italo ran a red light. Fabio still wouldn't accept this. He insisted that Italo had broken the rules and was probably under the influence of illegal substances. He completely ignored the toxicology results, which showed that everyone involved in the accident was sober. In his anger, he rallied his entire family against Italo. However, this was not difficult, considering how much everyone loved Roberta. Under Italian law, as in many other countries, an accident was punished far less severely than murder, and serious grounds were needed to classify Roberta's death as murder. Law enforcement tried to build a case, but aside from the ignored red traffic light, there was no evidence to establish the fact of murder. All of this made Fabio even angrier. On July 15, 2016, he initiated a memorial procession in honor of his deceased wife, which dozens of concerned individuals attended. He demanded that the perpetrator be brought to justice and led a torchlight procession despite the pouring rain. Hundreds of people gathered to march. They walked through the streets of Vasto, chanting slogans against the killer. Fabio himself did not mince words. Most of the participants did not want to forget Roberta and hoped to honor her memory and achieve justice for the fatal accident. However, Fabio's overly aggressive and defiant behavior puzzled many. There was something more disturbing than grief in the air. It was the real hatred that Fabio felt for Italo. Even before this memorable march, accusations and very harsh statements about Italo began to surface on social media. Italo's family perceived the dissemination of discrediting information as inappropriate. They defended Italo, insisting that in life he was completely different from how Fabio tried to portray him. They argued that Italo made a fatal mistake but did so unintentionally and was not a murderer, according to his family. All of this even attracted the attention of the prosecutor investigating Roberta's death. The aggressive Fabio was only calmed by the threat of being accused of stalking. Although he became taciturn and stopped publicly confronting Italo, he did not cease inciting those around him against Italo in daily life. Initially, this had a particularly strong impact on the families of Roberta and Fabio. At Fabio's initiative, a large poster with Roberta's image appeared on her grave, and a bench was installed at the scene of the accident, serving as a memorial. At first, dozens of relatives and friends visited the grave to honor the memory of her. Almost everyone encountered Fabio, regardless of the time they came. He could be found at the grave at any hour of the day. While others managed to contain their pain of loss, the grief-stricken husband began to behave more and more strangely. He quit his job and spent whole days at the grave of his deceased wife. In the first few days after the funeral, he came there to pray. He stayed for a couple of hours but then left. However, by the end of the first week, he was spending long hours there, then he began to stay for the entire day. Fabio even brought food with him, having lunch and dinner near the grave. His behavior began to resemble insanity. He could not come to terms with the loss of his beloved wife. He arrived as soon as the cemetery gates opened and left only before they closed. The situation worsened. Several times, he was spotted when the cemetery was already closing. At first, Fabio was stopped by the locked gates, but he began to climb over the wall. Local workers noticed that Fabio began spending the night on his wife's grave. It got to the point where he spent almost the entire day at the cemetery and refused to leave. When Fabio's relatives asked him about this, he stated that his wife's grave was the only place where he felt a connection and closeness to his late wife, as well as a semblance of peace. The rest of the time, he could not find peace, as the thought of the injustice of her death troubled him incessantly. He flatly refused to accept that Roberta was no longer alive. Relatives tried to support him, but Fabio became increasingly irritable, unpredictable. It was enough to merely mention Roberta's name, and he would explode in anger and behave aggressively. He claimed that money had not helped save Roberta, and therefore it was useless. Fabio's relatives began to fear that his mental state had deteriorated. The only consolation for him was the ongoing investigation into the accident. Fabio looked forward to the person responsible being sent to prison for a long time. That is why the events that followed unsettled him even more. A few days before Christmas, Italo's lawyer managed to find mitigating circumstances in the case. Firstly, Italo was doing volunteer work and was so socially active in this area that his efforts proved to be very beneficial. Several people spoke highly of him, stating that he had a very positive impact on their lives. Secondly, Italo had always dreamed of becoming a firefighter and serving the community. He also had no other misdemeanors, and there was no talk of a criminal record. He had not even violated traffic rules before. In addition, a thorough analysis of the video footage from the intersection showed that Roberta herself did not follow the rules. The footage revealed that she was driving without a helmet, and Italo's car was not exceeding the speed limit. He was respecting the limit despite ignoring the red traffic light. It was believed that if she had taken care of her safety and worn a helmet, the severe head injury could have been avoided, and she might have survived the collision. Fabio attended the preliminary hearing for Roberta's death hoping for justice. When he heard Italo's defense regarding mitigating circumstances, he exploded in a fit of uncontrollable rage. Several family members had to hold him back, fearing that Fabio might attack Italo. The judge took into account the mitigating circumstances presented by the defense. The lawyer's arguments sounded quite convincing, and even Roberta's relatives were unaware that she had neglected to wear a helmet. In the eyes of others, the defendant no longer appeared to be the cruel man Fabio had painted him to be. But not to Fabio, he continued to regard Italo as a monster deserving the harshest punishment. A hearing was scheduled, after which everyone dispersed. Italo remained free, at least until the trial's conclusion. As Fabio left the courtroom, he glared at Italo with long, piercing hatred. After that Christmas, Fabio's relatives noticed that his grief had reached its peak. He spent several days in front of his beloved's grave, kneeling and praying almost the entire time. This time, he did not even bring food with him, which looked very alarming. When asked about food, he chuckled, saying that he did not even feel hungry. Everyone was very concerned about Fabio's mental state, but any suggestions and attempts to send him to a doctor for help ended in conflict. Roberta's mother, father, brother, and other relatives tried several times to start a conversation about going to a psychiatrist for a consultation, but to no avail. The only thing he could think about, besides his wife, was the inability of law enforcement agencies to punish the insidious criminal Italo. The main hearing was scheduled for February 21, 2017. However, after hearing Italo's lawyer's defense and the judge's reaction, Fabio didn't have much hope for a harsh sentence. Hatred had consumed him completely. He craved not just justice, but also retribution. Judging by conversations with his loved ones, he had stopped believing in justice. By the end of 2016, he had become especially withdrawn and had almost no contact with his family. If he was not at his wife's grave, he would sit in his room, locked in, and eat almost nothing. Everyone was worried about his health, completely overlooking some important circumstances. Fabio had received a firearms license 10 years before these events, and in the following years, he regularly visited the shooting range to practice shooting. What had long been a simple hobby now seemed like the only right way out. Even worse, in September 2016, Fabio legally acquired a 9mm pistol, as he had all the necessary documents and the appropriate level of training. By the end of December 2016, Fabio's parents noticed that he had radically changed the design of his social media page. He posted gloomy updates with sad thoughts and also shared a scene from the film Gladiator, where the main character returns from the war to find that his entire family has been killed. Friends assumed this was how he was processing the bitterness of his loss and found his reflection in the movie's hero. In fact, it wasn't just his sadness and desire for justice that drove him. He was now consumed by a thirst for revenge. He felt that law enforcement was not on the side of good but was instead supporting the bad guy. The slowness and inefficiency of the justice system felt like a mockery of Roberta's death. Those close to him did not believe that the once good-natured Fabio could take up arms, and the photo from the film reflected his desire for lynching. After that, he made several more posts on his page. All of them were about the search for justice, but he did not hint at or indicate what he was planning to do. These were rather abstract musings, questions that concealed something much more disturbing. On February 1, 2017, Italo went to a cafe located in Vasto, Abruzzo. He visited this place periodically to unwind, and recently he had been going there more often for obvious reasons. Italo spent a lot of time talking with friends and acquaintances. He was very upset by the tragedy involving Roberta. He repeatedly stated that he was not going to run from justice, so he was ready to accept any court decision. Now, Italo found himself at the cafe again in search of support. The upcoming hearing was set to take place in 3 weeks. The only thing that distinguished his visit to the cafe from any other day was that he ran into Fabio at the entrance. This meeting seemed strange, as Italo knew that Fabio lived on the other side of the city and that they had not crossed paths before here. They exchanged a few short phrases. Suddenly, Fabio pulled out his 9mm pistol. He caught Italo talking on his cell phone, and Italo's father was on the other end of the line. The first bullet hit Italo in the stomach, the second in the leg, and the third in the neck. He immediately fell, bleeding. His father heard his son take his last breath through the phone. The wound to the neck was fatal, the artery had been severed. Other cafe patrons rushed to the noise. Fabio immediately got into his car and fled the scene. When paramedics arrived at the cafe, they pronounced Italo dead. The Carabinieri quickly interviewed witnesses, and thanks to their statements, the shooter was soon identified. They arrived at Fabio's family home, where his relatives told them where he could be found. The Carabinieri went to Roberta's grave, expecting to find Fabio there. It was assumed that he would most likely end one's own life. A semi-automatic pistol was found in a plastic bag on the gravestone. Ballistics tests were later conducted, confirming that it was this gun that was used to shoot Italo. His father then made an official statement, convincing the public that Roberta's death was a tragic accident. Italo's father knew that his son would never intentionally harm anyone. He pointed out that Italo wouldn't even drive after drinking a beer. In his father's opinion, Italo should not have to pay for the tragic circumstances with his life, especially since Roberta herself did not take adequate care of her own safety. A few hours after the murder, Fabio was found. Before turning himself in, he called a friend, confessed that he had shot his wife's killer and was going to the cemetery to say goodbye to Roberta. At that time, he revealed why he had been so upset by his wife's death. The evening she went to visit her parents, Roberta was planning to cook a treat and share the good news that she had learned she was pregnant. Roberta was expecting a child with Fabio, and the pregnancy was still in its early stages. Until that moment, Fabio was the only one who knew about it, and he understood the full scale of the tragedy. In addition to the death of his wife in a traffic accident, he lost his child, which was a double blow for Fabio. After Italo's death, his father continued to clear his son's name from the negativity directed at him on the internet and in life. He needed to present all these arguments at the trial so that his son would not receive the same harsh punishment as real criminals who acted with malicious intent. The father believed that Fabio had acted unfairly towards his son. Fabio had created an atmosphere of hatred against Italo to such an extent that the whole country branded him as an Italian killer. In reality, according to Italo's father, he was a victim of circumstances. Italo was not evil. He took Roberta's death very hard and often shared his feelings with his father, stating that the only thing he would like to correct in his life was running a red light. Italo's father created a sort of memorial in front of the cafe where his son was shot, placing Italo's photo and candles there, visiting every day to honor his memory. Public opinion was divided on the matter. Some supported Roberta's husband, believing that Fabio had done the right thing by seeking revenge on the offender who took his wife and child. Others felt that Fabio had acted too harshly and should have waited for the court's decision. Italo would certainly have received a fair verdict. In fact, after Italo's murder, Fabio's parents expressed their condolences to his family. They revealed that they had sought medical assistance 2 days before the crime when Fabio's unpredictable behavior reached its limits. They realized that he needed qualified psychiatric help, even if it meant he would have to be committed. They noticed that his behavior was completely out of control, leading them to fear for his mental health and request his hospitalization. Unfortunately, bureaucratic obstacles and the inertia of the system prevented this from happening in time. If Fabio's parents' appeal had been successful and he had been hospitalized immediately, perhaps a second tragedy could have been avoided. On February 4, 2017, Italo's coffin was present at the Vasto Church. The funeral was attended by numerous friends and family members. The ceremony was led by the same priest who had previously addressed Roberta's unexpected passing. Aware of the tragic events, he encouraged everyone present to act with kindness and respect towards one another. He urged attendees to refrain from expressing hatred, especially on social media. During this challenging time, the priest hoped to foster unity and put an end to further violence. Rather than a hearing about Roberta's death, which was stopped because the accused had died, Fabio found himself in court facing a charge of first-degree murder. His lawyer tried to argue that Fabio had not planned the crime and sought to lessen his responsibility due to his serious mental health problems. This defense could have helped him avoid a life sentence. However, the prosecutor provided strong evidence against this claim. On March 24, 2017, the court convicted Fabio Di Lello and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. The lawyer highlighted the significant decline in the client's mental health following the death of his cherished wife. He struggled to handle her loss, and timely support was lacking. The lawyer submitted an appeal, leading to further evaluations. On July 10, 2018, the appellate court shortened the prison sentence to 20 years, citing a diagnosis of an acute mental disorder for Fabio during the attack. However, the prosecution was dissatisfied with this ruling and requested that the original 30-year sentence be reinstated. On November 13, 2019, the Court of Cassation dismissed the appeals. Consequently, the 20-year prison sentence became official and final. Initially, Fabio faced significant challenges during his imprisonment. He received regular support from a psychiatrist and a priest because of his high risk of ending one's own life. Over time, however, he began to improve and the risk diminished. Fabio remains in prison and is scheduled for release in 2037.
June 22, 1980 was a Sunday. Early that morning, 25 years old, Stephanie Malin returned home at around 4 a.m. after finishing her shift as a waitress at a restaurant. Before going home, she stopped by a colleague's house, so by the time she got back, she was very exhausted. Everyone in the house was asleep. As she walked through the first floor, Stephanie noticed her 14-year-old cousin, Suzanne Bombardier, wasn't there. Suzanne usually waited on the living room sofa to greet her, but she assumed the girl must be elsewhere in the house. Despite calling Suzanne's name several times, she got no response. While the situation seemed odd, Stephanie wasn't alarmed. It was too early to search the house thoroughly, and she didn't want to wake her daughters, aged 5 and 6, who were sleeping in their room the night before. June 21st, Stephanie had asked Suzanne to babysit her girls. Suzanne loved spending time with the children and was excited to help. Known for being a responsible and kind teenager with excellent grades and big dreams for the future, Suzanne had eagerly accepted the task. Stephanie assumed Suzanne had fallen asleep in the children's room after putting them to bed. Feeling tired herself, Stephanie also went to bed without checking further. A few hours later, she woke up and began preparing breakfast for the kids. While she was in the kitchen, the phone rang. It was Suzanne's mother asking when her daughter would be coming home. Wanting to ask Suzanne directly, Stephanie went to the children's room, but found that the little girl wasn't there. Her daughters said Suzanne hadn't been in their room when they woke up and didn't know where she was. Growing concerned, Stephanie searched the entire house, from the first floor to the second, but Suzanne was nowhere to be found. It became clear that Suzanne hadn't spent the night at the house. Stephanie was alarmed. Stephanie called her own mother to inform her of Suzanne's disappearance. Both were confused, as Suzanne had always been a responsible teen. She never ran away, had no boyfriend, and certainly wouldn't leave young children alone in the house. Stephanie carefully searched for any clues about Suzanne's whereabouts, but found nothing. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, she and her mother contacted the police. Law enforcement officers arrived and began investigating. They asked when Suzanne was last seen. Stephanie recounted that on the evening of June 21st, she was preparing for her restaurant shift and asked Suzanne to watch the kids. After work, Stephanie planned to stop by a co-worker's birthday party. At around 8 p.m., Stephanie called home and asked Suzanne to bring her some clean clothes to work. Suzanne agreed and brought them. That was the last time Stephanie saw Suzanne. After delivering the clothes, Suzanne headed back home. Stephanie watched her cross the street and waved goodbye. This account was corroborated by Stephanie's daughters and her co-workers. The children confirmed that Suzanne returned home, gave them dinner, and helped tidy up their toys. They also remembered what Suzanne was wearing: a nightgown and a red robe. Suzanne wasn't dressed to go out, which suggested she wasn't planning to leave the house. After putting the children to bed, Suzanne intended to watch TV or read a pastime she enjoyed. She was supposed to spend the night at Stephanie's house and head home the next morning after breakfast. At around 1:30 SME, while at her co-worker's birthday party, Stephanie called home again to check in. Suzanne answered promptly and reassured her that everything was fine. The children were safely asleep, and Suzanne, feeling tired, was getting ready for bed. This phone call was the last confirmed contact anyone had with Suzanne. Using eyewitness accounts, investigators pieced together a rough timeline of the incident. Suzanne disappeared within a 2-hour window between 1:30 a.m., when Stephanie last called home, and 4 a.m., when Stephanie returned home and realized Suzanne was missing. The police initially suggested she might have run away, but her mother and sister rejected this possibility. Suzanne was calm, mild-mannered, and had no history of conflict with her family or aggressive behavior. Her teenage years were uneventful, and there was no reason to believe she would have left voluntarily. Moreover, her belongings, including her bag, clothes, and shoes, were left behind. It was highly unlikely that she would have run away wearing just a robe and slippers. The possibility of a kidnapping was considered. Detectives theorized that burglars might have broken in and encountered Suzanne, either as an unintended witness or because she attempted to intervene. However, this seemed improbable. No valuables or belongings were missing from the home, according to Stephanie, and there were no signs of forced entry or a struggle. Given the lack of disturbance, detectives speculated that Suzanne may have voluntarily allowed someone she knew into the house or left with them willingly. The lack of any evidence of a struggle or violence in the home. Everything was undisturbed, added to the mystery. The children sleeping in adjacent rooms heard nothing unusual. Investigators also questioned nearby neighbors in the townhouse complex. Families in neighboring units, who might have overheard something through the walls, reported nothing suspicious. Suzanne's disappearance shocked the quiet neighborhood and became the focal point of concern throughout the district. From the start, the case appeared inexplicable, and detectives struggled to find solid leads. Authorities combed the area around the house and thoroughly searched the premises, but found no new evidence. Neighbors and Suzanne's school community were interviewed, but no one had valuable information. Residents hadn't seen any unusual people or vehicles in the area. That Sunday evening had been an ordinary night, and given the time period, CCTV cameras were not yet common. The lack of surveillance made it harder for detectives to progress, and the investigation hit a dead end. Desperate for leads, police appealed to the public for any information. They received tips from several witnesses, but none panned out. 5 days after Suzanne's disappearance, there were still no breakthroughs or new evidence. Detectives began to suspect the worst, that Suzanne may have been killed, though her family refused to accept this possibility and clung to hope that she would be found alive. In the meantime, Suzanne's family worked tirelessly to spread awareness of her disappearance. They plastered the streets with flyers and distributed them widely. Investigators examined the family's immediate environment, but found no one who posed a potential threat to Suzanne. Her social circle didn't include any troublemaking teens. Detectives also started reviewing the profiles of local criminals with histories of abuse or violent offenses, but each had a verified alibi. The case took a tragic turn on June 27th, about 100 kilometers from where Suzanne lived. A man fishing on the San Joaquin River spotted something unusual in the water. Upon closer inspection from his boat, he discovered the naked body of a girl, washed up by the riverbank near a bridge. The man immediately alerted the police. The body was retrieved and sent for forensic analysis. Although it had been in the water for several days and had begun to decompose, the decomposition was not severe enough to erase all evidence related to the case. The forensic expert determined that the girl had been abused, and her death was caused by a stab wound to the chest. The victim had no identification or personal belongings that could help identify her. Authorities began checking local missing person reports and found one from the Bombardier family that stood out. Due to the warm season and the body's exposure to water, the body had swollen, making identification difficult. Ultimately, dental records confirmed the victim was Suzanne Bombardier. The forensic team collected evidence related to the crime and made attempts to study the perpetrator, but the technology of the 1980s was limited. At the time, there was no database to compare information, so law enforcement could only file the collected evidence and continue the search. Suzanne's disappearance was later classified as a murder investigation, with two main suspects identified: a man with a history of violence who lived near Stephanie's home, and Stephanie's ex-boyfriend, who had been behaving erratically. Before Suzanne disappeared, he had begged Stephanie for a second chance, but left shortly after being rejected. There were no other suspicious individuals within Suzanne's circle who might have had access to her. Detectives carefully investigated both suspects, but found no solid evidence, no witnesses, fingerprints, or anything to directly link them to the crime. Eventually, the leads were dropped, and efforts to find the killer failed. The case materials were archived, leaving Suzanne's murder unsolved for years. 14-year-old Suzanne Bombardier was buried in Lafayette, leaving her family devastated. The tragedy deeply affected her mother, who fainted upon learning her daughter's body had been found. The blow was made even crueler when, shortly after the terrible news, Suzanne's school report card arrived, showing only excellent grades. The community was shaken and outraged by the failure to find her killer. Concerned citizens often called the police station with leads, but none of them proved to be useful. Over the years, investigators tried several times to analyze the criminal's DNA found on Suzanne's body. In the 1990s, despite progress in building DNA databases, poor sample quality and limited technology hampered the process. By the 2000s, the case had faded from public memory, remembered only by Suzanne's family and community elders determined to see justice served. In 2014, local journalist Jennifer Kathleen Gibbons learned about the case and was shocked that the killer had never been caught and might still be free. She located Suzanne's grave and started blogging about the crime, speaking in depth with Suzanne's family, residents, and retired detectives. Her regular posts reignited public interest in the case, sparking questions about why the killer remained unpunished. Although the police have not given up on the case, Jennifer's posts have increased public pressure, prompting the police to step up their investigation to find answers. In 2015, a newly formed cold case task force revisited Suzanne Bombardier's murder. Several police officers requested the sheriff's approval and resources to address this tragic unsolved case. DNA samples from Suzanne's case were retrieved from the archives, and the team, consisting of dedicated law enforcement professionals, began the challenging work of reviewing the decades-old evidence. Suzanne's case was the oldest unsolved violent crime in Antioch. The timing of the investigation was deliberate, as advancements in forensic technology could now analyze degraded or limited DNA samples, tools that hadn't been available during the original investigation. With renewed hope and determination, investigators sought to finally bring Suzanne's killer to justice. Nearly 40-year-old evidence was sent to the San Mateo County Medical Examiner's Lab, enabling investigators, for the first time, to create a complete DNA profile of the killer. Previous efforts had failed due to inadequate technology, but this time was different. In early 2017, armed with the DNA profile, investigators compared it to a database of registered criminals. To their surprise, the results pointed to Mitchell Lynn Bacon, a major breakthrough in the case. Initially skeptical, detectives conducted additional tests, cross-checking the profile with the FBI DNA database. The results confirmed a match. Mitchell Lynn Bacon, born on March 21, 1954, in a small town near Racine, California. He had lived in Antioch, where he crossed paths with Stephanie and Suzanne. He had long been a suspect in Suzanne's murder, but a lack of evidence had prevented charges until now. In 1973, Mitchell had been convicted of multiple crimes, including assault, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Though the charges could have warranted life imprisonment, leniency was granted due to his lack of a prior record. After serving his sentence, he was arrested again in 1981 for more violent crimes and received a 24-year prison sentence. His offenses primarily involved abuse. Upon his release, he was required to register as an abuser offender but failed to do so. This violation led to another 4-year prison sentence in 2002, officially entering him into criminal databases. When police tracked down 63-year-old Mitchell in 2017, he was still living in Antioch. He was arrested calmly as he returned from the store. Despite overwhelming evidence, he denied any involvement in Suzanne's murder. After his arrest, detectives held a press conference, announcing plans to compare his DNA to other unsolved cases. By the time of his capture, he had lived unpunished for 37 years. His methods resembled those of a serial killer, prompting suspicions that he might be linked to additional murders. For Suzanne's family, justice finally seemed within reach. One of the key obstacles to convicting Mitchell in 1980 had been his alibi. He claimed he had been with his aunt at a bar in a nearby town, far from Suzanne's babysitting location. According to him, he left the bar around 2 a.m., stopped at an intersection, visited a convenience store where the clerk recognized him, and then drove home. His aunt and the store clerk both corroborated his story, creating a plausible, albeit tight, timeline that cast doubt on his involvement. This alibi prevented investigators from conclusively linking him to the crime, even though he was considered the most likely suspect. Stephanie, however, had long believed Mitchell was involved in her cousin Suzanne's murder. As someone who had interacted with the family during their brief relationship, Mitchell had earned Suzanne's trust, a trust that tragically sealed her fate. On the night of the murder, she unknowingly let him in, unaware of the danger he posed. Stephanie had ended her relationship with Mitchell after just 3 dates, finding him unsettling. After their breakup, Mitchell began regularly visiting the restaurant where she worked, sitting at a nearby table and silently watching her without ordering anything. His alarming behavior foreshadowed the darker truth that would come to light decades later. Stephanie felt intimidated by Mitchell's behavior and chose to cut off all contact with him. However, he refused to leave her alone. He left notes on her doorstep and repeatedly showed up at her workplace, attempting to reconnect. Stephanie later learned that one of her colleagues had given him her home address. The colleague claimed ignorance of their breakup, but this act put Suzanne in danger and ultimately led to her kidnapping, abuse, and murder. In 1980, during the investigation, Mitchell was offered a polygraph test, which he agreed to take. However, the results were inconclusive. Despite multiple interrogations, Mitchell never confessed, and due to insufficient evidence, he couldn't be definitively linked to the crime. Finally, 37 years later, he was arrested and charged with murder, kidnapping, and abuse. A forensic expert couldn't determine whether Suzanne had been abused before or after her murder. The prosecutor debated whether to pursue life imprisonment without parole or the death penalty. Mitchell continued to deny his involvement in the murder. Ultimately, the prosecution opted for life imprisonment, as seeking the death penalty could result in prolonged legal battles and appeals. In such cases, defense lawyers often file repeated appeals, forcing the victim's family to continually relive the tragedy. Additionally, given Mitchell's age, it was uncertain whether he would live long enough to face execution. Once the decision for a life sentence was made, an official reconstruction of events followed. The prosecution argued that Mitchell coerced Suzanne into leaving her house since she would never have abandoned her young nieces under any circumstances. It was believed that Mitchell threatened Suzanne with a knife, forcing her to leave her home. Her family believed she sacrificed herself to protect her nieces from harm. According to the prosecution, Suzanne was killed with a knife that had a blade at least 15 centimeters long. The blade was sharp enough to pierce her heart with a single fatal strike, causing near-instant death. The prosecution also contended that Mitchell used the same knife to threaten her during the abduction. After committing the crime, he disposed of Suzanne's body. It is believed that Mitchell took Suzanne to a remote location, where he abused her and then killed her with immense force, nearly piercing her body completely. The prosecution argued that Mitchell abused her again after her death. The defense took an unusual approach. They argued, citing a state law that imposes a lighter sentence for abuse of a corpse, that the abuse occurred after Suzanne was dead, and that Mitchell was not involved in her kidnapping or murder. Instead, they claimed he found Suzanne's lifeless body and took advantage of the situation. This argument was strengthened by the lack of evidence proving Suzanne's abduction. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle at Stephanie's home, giving the defense room to create doubt. However, the prosecution still had critical evidence to counter these claims. Mitchell's criminal history followed a clear and troubling pattern across several recorded incidents. In 1973, he was arrested after being suspected of abuse an underage girl during a burglary. During the investigation, it was revealed that he was guilty of another crime, which led to charges of abuse, burglary, and assault with intent to kill. Following his release, he broke into another home in a different city, where he committed robbery and abused a schoolgirl. During the assault, he tied up the victim, burned her with a cigarette, and stabbed her with a knife. Miraculously, the girl survived. The victim recalled Mitchell's unsettling behavior during the attack. He appeared to enjoy his actions immensely, humming and laughing to himself like a deranged individual. The physical and emotional scars left on the survivor required a long recovery. Prosecutors argued that the similarities between these crimes provided significant evidence linking him to the kidnapping and murder of Suzanne Bombardier. The trial for Suzanne's case was set for March 2022. After Mitchell's arrest, a press conference highlighted the persistent efforts of the detectives who had volunteered to investigate Antioche's oldest case. The police also credited the media's role in keeping Suzanne's story alive through reports published in 2015 and 2016. Authorities stressed the possibility of Mitchell being involved in other violent crimes around the U.S. In their appeal to the public, they urged anyone with information about his involvement in other crimes to contact the Antioche Police Department. They reassured people that Mitchell was now in custody and posed no threat, encouraging past victims or witnesses to come forward. However, no one responded to their call for information. The trial concluded on March 15, 2022, when the jury unanimously convicted Mitchell Lynn Bacon of first-degree murder, as well as other charges such as robbery, kidnapping, and abuse. On June 27, 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. During his sentencing hearing, a chilling revelation emerged. A former prisoner claims Mitchell confessed to systematically abusing and killing escort girls while working as a truck driver, traveling across the country for years. Authorities are currently investigating these claims to uncover evidence of these alleged crimes. However, Mitchell has denied these accusations, calling his former cellmate's story a fabrication. The search for truth continues, as authorities work to determine whether Mitchell is responsible for more atrocities.